Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Angry Sun Zone. We're here today to talk about the games we love to hate. That's right. This is the angry episode.
Yeah, true to our name. It's time to get mad.
And so these are games that for one reason or another, well, for specific reasons rather, we don't like them. We'll tell you why we don't like them, and you'll get to get a better idea of each of our tastes, and as well just see the games that failed to make an impression on impressionable young gamers like ourselves. Anyway, I'm Sean.
I'm Santo.
And I'm Alex.
And let's get right into it.
But first, we have some late-breaking, not-so-breaking news. So, for the listeners, we also have a YouTube channel. Just search up Angry Sun Zone on YouTube. And the first video that we posted there was a reaction to the E3 Nintendo Direct. And in that video, we saw probably the least expected remaster / re-release that I thought we were going to see this year, which was Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp coming out on December 3rd. 6 days later, on December 9th, the actual most unexpected re-release is coming. Monster Rancher 1+2 is getting released on Switch and Steam, and what is this year? This is like the Santo re-release year. Those are two of my favorite games that are coming, that they're, re-releasing for whatever reason. And Monster Rancher doesn't even make sense to re-release. On the Switch, that doesn't have a place to put discs.
No.
That's awesome.
Am I gonna, jam an SD card in there with random files that's just gonna scan those? That could be kinda cool.
Just scan your high school prom reunion pics and see what kind of monster comes out of that mess.
Oh man, it's some weird flower ape. But
chilling. Truly chilling.
I mean, the reason that I even saw this was I saw that they're adding Suezo from Monster Rancher into the new Monkey Ball game. So it's that weird eye creature rolling around in a hamster ball, and it collects CDs instead of bananas.
Okay, good. For a second there, I thought you might have been talking about the next Smash character.
Oh my god, if that happened, I might die from excitement. Apparently it's the Monster Rancher 25th anniversary, who knew?
I didn't.
Getting that out of the way, let's go from, one of my favorite games to just, some games that just... Hate is maybe a strong word for some of these games. There are a couple games here that I do hate. I'll save those for later. So let's get into it with a disliked game, and I think I'm going to start off with the Caligula Effect Overdose.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. God damn it. Okay. So I remember I initially said, okay, this game is either brilliant or it's crap. Unfortunately, it's crap. Yeah, I finished it last night, after putting about 40 hours into it, and again, the good concepts that I spoke about on the
we're just
couple
that
episodes ago. Yeah.
Concepts.
Yeah, the battle system is still good. The music, after finishing it, the music in that game is really, really good. And the story and the characters, for the most part, is good. But it just got so tedious, so tedious with the recruiting NPC stuff, because for every NPC you want to complete a quest with, you gotta talk to them 3 times, then you gotta listen to their story again after talking to them 3 times, and accept their quest. You can only hold 1 quest at a time, and then you have to, for a lot of these quests, add them into your party to do something. And some of those are just you have to add them into your party to equip something, and then the quest is finished, and then you just eject them from your party. So much of the game's flow is just... It's like this game was designed by a robot or something. It doesn't feel like this game was designed by a human who ever actually touched it with their hands. All the areas that you're in are gigantic, which doesn't make sense because this was a Vita game originally. And when you think about it, if you're designing a game for a portable system, the game should probably be broken up into bite-sized chunks so that people can, play it on their commute and whatnot. The game has a fair amount of save points, but still the areas are so bloody huge that, traversing them and fighting battles along the way might take you a really long time. And for some of the character quests, you need to bring them to a specific NPC in these gigantic areas, and the NPCs aren't labeled on the map, so you have to remember where they are, which can be pretty taxing when you also have 500 or so quests to complete for all the different NPCs. The equipment is pretty meaningless. There's not a great sense of progression there. The battles later on in the game don't feel so different from when you started the game, and unfortunately the ending felt pretty flat. It's the budgetness of the game really shone through there, where I was expecting a lot more of a spectacle in the ending, but there was 2 anime cutscenes in the game up to that point, and if you do the true ending, you get a half animated ending that's still frames. If you do the bad ending, you get a fully animated cutscene. So I don't know what's up with that, man.
That's a pretty weird
They have invested their budget wrong.
Yeah, so this game's frustrating because again, a lot of it's, I need to see what the sequel is.
Oh no.
I'm a broken person.
Oh no.
I'm a broken person. I put 40 hours into this game. It came out thinking this was a bit of a waste of time. I was still I gotta check that sequel, man. Because if they learned their lesson about just the gameplay of it, then it could be a really great RPG, because that's the problem with it, was the gameplay. Everything else surrounding the gameplay was pretty good. So, I don't know. We'll see. Maybe you'll hear me talk about that in a later episode. I don't know if I'll get around to that, or tackle a gigantic backlog.
The backlog.
So yeah, just, super recent game that I didn't end up liking.
Awesome.
That's unfortunate, but hey, not every RPG can be a winner. And
most of them aren't.
This is what we get for choosing it based on the title alone.
So, we've got our list of games. The worst of the worst.
I don't know if I'd say that we want to... These aren't necessarily the worst of the worst, okay?
Yeah.
Something I'm actually gonna say that I really struggled actually picking out games to talk about that I dislike, because the thing is, there is an avalanche of terrible, terrible games. There's been many consoles that have been filled with, just shovelware, whatever developers can get out the door as fast as possible. And the games are bad, and they're not worth playing. They're not even worth talking about, because they're not good, and they do so many things poorly that it's just not worth talking about. And back in the day, we might talk about all of the shovelware on the Wii during that generation, or all the shovelware on the Atari that literally collapsed the game industry, many decades ago, before Nintendo brought it back from the brink of death. And today, with Steam and digital platforms, a lot of developers can basically just put out whatever they want with minimal barriers. Anyone can, in principle, self-publish and just put an executable file on their own personal website, which is a game. And in fact, some incredible games I have downloaded that way from a random person's personal website, and they've made a brilliant small indie game. And Cave Story actually started about that.
Yeah.
Like that. And we've talked about Cave Story before as one of our favorite games of all time. And literally just one guy putting something up on his personal website many years ago. Of course, now you can get it everywhere. And so there is a whole vast array of terrible games that simply aren't worth talking about. A couple games that I was going through that I viscerally disliked because they were so terrible. It's not even really worth talking about them. There was this one, and the game is called No Time to Explain, and I'm going to spend no time explaining how bad that game is. You should never play it.
Yeah. For me, some of the games that made the list are not necessarily the worst of the worst, but they do represent the end of a quality series. And what remains after that quality series is hot garbage. So there are some games that represent the fall of Rome for some of those gaming empires, and I'll be sure to talk about a few of those.
We've also got a few games here that aren't necessarily... They're not terrible, they're not bad. Some of them are even quite popular, but they're just games that we take issue with. And we're going to explain what it is that we take issue with about those games.
Yeah, and like I've said with the Caligula effect earlier, there are some games that have very good ideas with them that are bogged down by other things. Like, a couple of the games on my list, I think, with a few changes, could have been great games. But there's just individual aspects of them that, make me mad. Make me so mad.
Oh, man. Awesome.
So, Sean, which gaming lineage do you think that got trampled do you think we should talk about first?
For me, I want to talk about Star Wars.
Okay.
All right.
And specifically, I want to put the flame broiler on Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Which Star Wars Battlefront 2?
Yeah.
The second.
Okay.
Okay. Star Wars Battlefront 2 too. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because the first Star Wars Battlefront 2 was amazing.
You know what? They did the sequel dirty. The sequel to the sequel.
Yeah.
And I think that largely it was just because a certain arts of the electronic industry managed to get their dirty, grubby, money-making hands on it and tried to turn it into a living, breathing slot machine to which they would make a lot of money, and they basically destroyed it. If you compare Battlefront 2 to Battlefront 2 1...
Oh god, we need different names for these.
Yeah. The OG Battlefront 2, you will find that, I don't know, it just rubs me in so many wrong ways when I play it. Like the game, they almost thrust the loot box mechanic in your face like some sort of digital penis. It feels like I'm choking on it every time I'm playing it. I'm like, it doesn't feel natural.
It's like reverse prostitution. You pay to not get fucked.
Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like for me, it makes it even worse that it's a licensed thing.
Yeah.
Like the fact that it's Star Wars. Like, say what you will about loot boxes and cosmetics, like I don't mind them as much in games that are, I don't necessarily want to say wholly original because League of Legends and Dota, like the skins and stuff like that, like those aren't that, I don't find the paying for those cosmetics that too egregious, but for something like Star Wars, it's like you got the backing of, EA and Disney, these two monolithic companies that already, have so much money that they're just, it's so transparent that they're trying to milk the audience out of it. It rubs me worse than a lightsaber on a tauntaun's belly.
And you know what? I think that just overall, when I see a video game studio advertise now that their game has no microtransactions, as if that's a selling point, I'm like, part of me laughs and part of me dies a little bit inside because I'm just like, it kind of used to be like that. And
yeah.
It feels as if we've entered into a new dark age where the urge to try and milk the masses of all their money makes you feel as though, someone is just jerking you around, and it's almost as if, how do I put this? It makes me, I can think of quite a few games where the gaming experience, started for me before that particular game. And actually, I'll talk about another game that I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with, and that would be Magic the Gathering Arena. Yeah. Because it's designed that if you want to play it in certain ways or have a certain amount of enjoyment out of it, sure, you can follow the straight and narrow path that they make you feel like you have a choice, to play it for free. But unless you're really good at the game like Santo, it turns out to be quite an expensive venture. And there's tons of games, like that gacha genre.
Yeah.
Oh, bloody hell. The gacha genre definitely, it makes me understand why the heck China, all the way over there, they've all of a sudden banned, video games even further, and now, you can only play, what is it now, 1 hour a day for 3 days?
Yeah, just like restricting a bunch of stuff, yeah.
And I think that, it just goes to say that I hate to think that the video game industry as a whole would need to have, a warning label on it, like cigarettes or alcohol. But, like, how did we get here? How did we get here from the golden age when we used to play a game, and the only reason why we stayed up playing it all night was because it was so goddamn fun.
Yeah, I mean, it became a big business. Right?
Yeah.
That's really all there is to it, is that it became, to be fair a little bit to these big game development studios, the amount of money they spend on a lot of these AAA titles it's utterly insane.
Yeah.
And I think that, part of that is that, a lot of people expect their games to have a certain, like, high fidelity style to them. And, I mean, we've talked about this before a little bit, but it's the art assets that take the time, right?
Yeah.
That takes the time, that costs the money.
It takes a long time, it costs a lot of money, and the thing is that people have very high expectations, especially because games can now basically, they have such visual fidelity, they can almost get past the uncanny valley
Everything
in real
saying,
time.
yeah.
And the thing is that they can do that, but they can only do that with an absolutely mind-boggling amount of, artistic, like, effort that goes into developing them. And it's, and they see that and they say, how are we going to pay for all this? Right?
Yeah.
And the thing is that I think that unlike maybe some other industries, the gaming industry doesn't do a very good job of as a studio, like if we compare to movies, right? Because movies have much the same problem if we're talking about big budget movies, big budget video games. But see, there are some, schools of thought in the movie industry, both in live action and in animation, where they basically look at, the stuff they do to make money and the stuff they do because they want to make a good film or a good TV series or whatever, right? And they sort of like, the people even involved in the business side of it actually see it that way. And, and they sort of like, kind of shuffle money around in that sort of idea of like, okay, well, we know this movie's just here to make money, and we know this other movie's just here to, be cool. And they don't care so much if the weird stuff that they finance doesn't, like, as long as they want it to be profitable. Mm-hmm. But they don't need every single movie to be a blockbuster hit that, like, makes 100 times its investment back or something like that. But they do expect that from some other movies because they're intentionally balancing this idea that as a movie studio, they are going to subsidize what they want to make with what they have to make. And I don't think I don't think game studios really, like, the big game studios definitely don't look at it that way, and the indie game, I don't think the indie game studios look at it that way either. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. I mean, I think there's something to a lot of the indie studios that just focus on making good games always, and they know that as long as they make a good game, that they'll be able to recoup their costs.
Yeah. Like, sometimes the big studios do that, where they have publishing deals where they will publish smaller games as, just to get a bit more prestige under their belts. But, like, you see this, like, EA even has, like, their EA originals. They produce the games made by Hazelight, which were A Way Out and It Takes Two, which It Takes Two was actually, like, very profitable because pandemic. But it's weird because, like, it's very easy to be... it's very easy to be cynical about those with EA because.
I mean, I'm just gonna. It's funny when you were saying, a brilliant series, ruined by mismanagement and focusing on the dollar. I'm like, so we're gonna talk about multiple, and they're all gonna be ruined by EA then?
Well, some of them, yeah.
Some of them for sure. You know what? Before we move on, in general, whenever I review a game and give it a poor ranking, I'll give you a game that you should try instead.
Okay.
And so, if you're thinking of trying Battlefront 2, instead try Battlefront 2 1. It definitely hits the mark there. And if you can play it with your friends, all the better.
Well, that might be... that's difficult. That's difficult now because the multiplayer was such a big thing and
Did the first Battlefront 2 even have a single player? Because I think I only played multiplayer.
It did. Yeah, it's a single player. It had...
and it's,
had a few different modes.
Yeah. It's funny, too, just talking about Star Wars as a series. Because I feel like the Star Wars series has been really weird. It's always been a bit of a mix of cash grabs and just, games that you can tell the developers just really wanted to make. Sometimes at the same time, but usually, because they definitely made some terrible tie-in movie games. Mm-hmm. But then they also made a lot of Star Wars games that were, Knights of the Old Republic was totally its own thing. It wasn't even related to the other Star Wars canon initially, and probably... Yeah. I don't even know if it's technically canon anymore.
They decanonized the entire extended universe, so...
Yeah, so I guess so no. Yeah. But...
Speaking of Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, that's another game on my list now. I actually don't like that game, but I didn't put it on my list, because that was the case with me playing it and being like, I thought this was an RPG. This isn't an RPG. Because I was so used to JRPGs.
Oh, yeah.
That just, turned me off. But...
You know what? I will pass the buck on to one of you guys for the next game in the series here.
All right. Well, if we want to keep it in space, next game I want to talk about is Into the Breach, and this is an example that there are certain things when you add them to a game, or when you decide, okay, I'm going to make a game of this genre. There are pros and cons associated with it. And being roguelite, that definitely adds pros and cons to it. Pros, if you capitalize on the pros, you have a game that has a ton of variety that you can replay over and over again. It's different every time, and they'll keep a player playing it for much longer than just a linear single player adventure. But on the other hand, making it like that means that you can run into pitfalls that I think Into the Breach does, where I just don't think the game is varied enough between each individual playthrough. Yeah,
that's a pitfall, definitely, of a lot of lesser roguelikes, where every run kind of feels the same. I definitely felt that with Into the Breach. It really feels like you're just doing the same thing over and over, and they have some different factions with mechs that do different things, and unfortunately I found that they all tend into just being totally worthless, to be honest. There were some interesting ideas they had, and it didn't really work as the synergy wasn't there between the different, because you're kind of locked into particular units, faction unit structures.
Well, I disagree about that, because I think each individual crew is all about synergy. My problem with them is that each crew seemed to have one gimmick that all the mechs work towards, and if you weren't doing that gimmick, you weren't going to be successful. Yeah, so it really it's a weird thing of you give the player a bunch of these different options, but any option they pick, they're locked into something very specific with that. So it's a weird mix of giving the player choice and then taking it away that I just did not like about it.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there that, each faction basically has a gimmick that their gameplay style revolves around. I just felt that some of the gimmicks were just bad.
Yeah,
and
I
not fun to execute, and on some maps not even possible. Like there's one particular faction. I mean, there's more than one. I mean, the whole game, a lot of the factions revolve around moving units around. But I swear there's one faction that's just nearly impossible to actually use properly if there are no hazards on the stage.
Yeah.
Because they don't even have a combat ability or something like that. Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. Anyway,
well, we're getting into the weeds. It's been a while since we
you know
played
what?
them.
I'll be the contrarian and say I really did like Into the Breach a lot. It actually is one of my more favorite games. I do understand what you're saying about it, and there were tons of things that I thought that I was actually surprised that they didn't come out with any updates or even expansions to the game that totally would have.
I think that surprises me too, because it's the FTL developers, and they did a great expansion
job
to FTL after that came out.
Well, I think even before the expansion, FTL, the base game, still had some updates and stuff that kind of tightened it up a bit. So it is quite surprising that they didn't do any. I mean, it was kind of a disappointment for me because I loved FTL, and the concept, at least on paper, sounded interesting for Into the Breach. And honestly, like the first 2 hours I spent with the game, I really liked it. But it got very samey, and I think the one thing that annoyed me the most, I think, is that the maps don't change, and I think that really brought it down a lot.
Yeah, like that's what I got written here is like there wasn't enough progression between start and end in each individual run, and there wasn't enough variation in the places that you're going and what you're doing there. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but the final stage is always the exact same every time, pretty much. Like, it's got the top level where you're doing stuff, and then you got the bottom level where you're fighting around. Like,
even a lot of the campaign missions, the actual missions are just identical.
Yeah. So like that's kind of, I want to bring it back around to what I said at the beginning, is that there's pros and cons. Like, I think that the core gameplay of Into the Breach, though, I think is absolutely excellent because it's a game where you're given perfect information and you have to deal with that. It's a turn-based strategy game, but it's almost a puzzle game with how you need to plan your turns out, be thinking ahead, and that I felt that the gameplay of it was very rewarding, but it's just the roguelike aspect of it I thought hurt the game so much. That like a game with those mechanics that had a longer, more varied linear path, I think would have been a much better game for it.
Yeah, I think so. Because definitely what they tried to do with the missions is that because they had fixed maps, okay? And the reason they had fixed maps is because there are certain things that you need to have on the different maps for different styles of gameplay to even be possible. And so I think that was probably why they didn't go with like randomly generated maps, is just so that they were trying to avoid that kind of some of those issues with random maps. But what we ended up with was kind of a worst of both worlds situation, I would say, where we've got fixed maps that don't change, fixed objectives, but we don't have the care of going into like, specific details like in a linear story that might make that okay. And then we also don't have like the variance that we get from something more random in some other roguelikes that might randomly generate maps and randomly generate terrain. So, and then the other thing is that for me, at least, I thought the idea of the perfect information seemed nice, but I think the execution of it wasn't always as fun because you end up in, like, if we're analogizing it to a puzzle game, all right, it's a puzzle game where the difficulty is just all over the place. And I think with puzzle games in particular, like, it would be weird if you were playing a puzzle game and, you got a really hard level and then a really easy level and then a medium level and then, like, it just... Like, puzzle games typically have a fairly smooth progression, difficulty curve. And I think that's good for puzzle games. But then if this is more like a puzzle game, its difficulty curve is super whacked out. And I think also that goes to the fact that they have this non-linear thing going a little bit, where you can go to the different regions in whatever order you choose, but it does increase the difficulty of the. So if you go to the ice region first, it's going to be easier. If you go to the ice region second, it's going to be a little harder. If you go to the ice region third, it'll be a little harder again. You go to it last, it'll be the hardest. But the problem is that the terrain types and the mission types are fixed, and so the difficulty adjustment is like kind of imperfect, and it tends to just. I found the difficulty curve to be almost random in Into the Breach. Like it's not totally random, but it's way less smooth than it should be for a game like that, in my opinion. And again, it's going back to those challenges of having it essentially set up as a roguelike when it would be much better as a linear game.
Yeah. Well, you bring up a lot of good points, but I'm still going to disagree with you about the perfect information stuff. I thought that solving each individual turn felt actually really satisfying. Like, again, like this is an imperfect game to me, but like I don't like it. I wouldn't call it a bad game though.
Yeah. One of the other things I'll say about it is that I think the sound design was way lacking compared to FTL, and that kind of surprised.
That might be fair. Yeah, I'd love to have an opinion on this, but I don't think I think I probably turned off the music after my first run. So
yeah,
interesting.
I mean, the music was. Did it even have music?
If it did, it was completely unmemorable.
Like, yeah, I mean that's the thing. Like the music, I'm like, did it even have music? I don't.
I think it had what we would consider background music.
I think it had background music that was just totally forgettable. But not just that, but also like the sounds, like the combat sounds were lacking weight, and they weren't like. Don't get me wrong, they weren't like awful or anything, but they were forgettable. And for me, I was just a bit disappointed because FTL was so good on the sound design. Like the music in FTL I have on playlists that I just listen to because it's so good. The sound effects in FTL are very memorable. And of course, part of that also goes back to the fact that in FTL, you have events that happen, and the sound effects are linked to those events, and so they carry a lot more emotional weight. And at core, I felt that was also like, yeah, I had no emotional investment in anything in Into the Breach, really. It has no. You don't care about really any, like, it's a game where you're saving the world, and you
destroying cities full of people.
Destroying cities full of people, and you couldn't be bothered to, care at all. It's a technically interesting game sometimes. Like, the puzzly aspects are fun, but compared to how much FTL had going on in that department, again, it's just sort of a bit of a disappointment.
I think we can move on from Into the Breach into a different game, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
What do we got?
Well, if we want to keep a little bit on the theme of games that murdered a franchise, I know we've talked about it before a few times of how we don't like this game, but I'm not done. Fallout 3.
Yep.
Like, a pretty big departure from the previous two games, and we've talked about how the open worldness and the jank is just makes this game pretty much unplayable. But one thing that I haven't brought up yet is how bad I think the combat is in that game. I think the combat is so rough. Now, when it comes to first-person melee combat, there are extremely few games that I think does that well. I think the only game that I would say, yes, that does that well is like Chivalry. That's it.
Okay, yeah.
So, like, I'm willing to give them a little bit of a pass on that. Like, it's not good, but that's something that I don't see done well in a lot of games, so whatever. But the gunplay in that game just feels so rough. Like, a lot of the enemies, I feel, don't really react to any damage that you're doing to them, whether shooting or melee wise all of the time, and I guess this kind of makes sense with like, it's got RPG elements to it, so when you hit an enemy in a Final Fantasy game, they stay the exact same. It's like, okay, fine, but when you give your game first person shooter combat, like,
well, and not just that, but it has like the multiple modes of combat where you can either shoot, as in a traditional first person shooter, or you can go into a kind of almost not quite turn based, but like a time freezing tactical mode where you can target different body parts, and it's like, well,
a lot of the time that just didn't matter.
Yeah, like I want a game where, like, if you're gonna do something like that, it has to matter, right? Like, I should be making a decision to be prioritizing, like, oh, do I blow this guy's arm off because he's like dual wielding 2 guns, or do I blow his leg off to slow him down?
Yeah,
right?
But for like all the humanoid enemies, it's just like get close enough until you have a reasonable shot to hit them in the head, because headshots do a ton of damage, and then just do that. Or if you're not doing that, shoot them in the body, because that's the best hit percentage.
You know what I would have liked to see instead of how they handled that would have been some sort of quick time event, but you only get one. And whatever you do changes the nature of the fight you're going into. So, if you're facing an enemy with 2 guns, yeah, sure, shoot him in the arm. And should you beat that quick time event, then, you've now changed the dynamic of that fight a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know.
But don't allow people to come back to it over and over and over and over again in the same fight.
Yeah, and the gunplay, both in VATS and just, aiming down sights or hip firing, it did not feel good.
And how
like
the glitches?
Like the rest of that game.
The glitches!
Oh, yeah, the glitches in Bethesda games are
astounding.
I'm amazed they are allowed to ship any of them, given the state that they're in. Fallout 3 in particular, I couldn't finish playing it because of the glitches. That's why I stopped playing.
If we made airplanes like Bethesda made cars, the travel industry would be done. There would be pandemonium, death, chaos.
Yeah. On the gunplay, though, I think the other thing is that the gunplays are slow, and it feels slow. It is slow, but now the thing is, if you want to make your gunplay slow, that's okay, but you can't do nothing in response. Like, if you want to make the gunplay slow because it's really tactical and there's decisions to make and it's like, interesting, that could be good. But that's not what Fallout 3 is. The gunplay is slow and boring, and you're always doing the same thing, which is just aiming for the high percentage shots and just, like, it's not fun because you just, it's what to do. It just takes a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually, broadly speaking, I don't know if was there anything else you wanted to talk about Fallout 3 specifically?
I didn't like any of the characters. I thought the plot line was boring as hell. The original ending of that game made 0 sense. Because you're basically at this... I never finished the game, so this is third-hand information over, but the original ending of that game is that there's like a nuclear reactor or something that's going to go critical or some bullshit like that, and somebody has to turn it off. And you literally have a super mutant companion right next to you. And there wasn't an option to just send him in there and solve the problem. So you had to do the heroic sacrifice to go into this highly irradiated place to save everybody. It's like, there's a fucking super mutant right there. Literally 0 problems.
Yep.
So it's just like, fucking bro, like you're not even being faithful to your own universe. Like, it feels, that entire game felt like they got that property and then just didn't know what to do with it.
Oh my god.
They wanted to make their own thing, but then they just slapped that name onto it because it had recognition.
Yeah. I mean, broadly speaking, I basically dislike all of the modern Bethesda games for roughly the same reasons. Like, I hated Oblivion 2. And I think I've already talked about this a bit, but and broadly speaking, my criticisms also apply to Skyrim because that's the same game as Oblivion. But broadly speaking, it's funny because I was talking to a friend, and she was like, "Oh, I loved Skyrim. Why don't you like Skyrim?" And I'm like, "Okay, well, first of all, the combat is very slow and boring." And it's funny because she was like, "Okay, yeah, the combat's not great. Second of all, the inventory management is poorly done. I don't know how they got the inventory management just so awful in the Oblivion game that I played mostly Oblivion, and it was funny because she conceded that too. I'm like, oh yeah. As an example, the Diablo series handles inventory management in a very similar style, but much better. And then you've got the glitches. The glitches were really
beautiful.
Not good. I mean, there's so many bugs.
Disastrous.
In literally every Bethesda game I've played. There's just bugs everywhere.
I've got a list of improvements that you can do to make your Skyrim experience much more enjoyable.
Yes, I know that it has an insane modding community that's probably tried to fix any problem that I could conceivably have with the games. But I will not accept that as them having released a good game. Okay?
You know what? This is fair.
Exactly.
If Oblivion with mods is the greatest game of all time, I don't care. Oblivion's still a piece of shit.
Let me tell you what makes it better is the first thing you need to do is replace the dragons with Thomas the Tank Engine. This is the number one improvement that will vastly make your experience way better. Second off, instead of playing the normal game, the first thing you should do is make a beeline for the Daedric bow. Because let me tell you, with that weapon in your hands, you will truly have a better experience. And then you should proceed to get infected and follow the vampire storyline so you can go around fucking with absolutely everything. And lastly, you should make sure to fuss Roda every major character that you come in contact with to see how this terribly fucks up the game. Make sure to quick save before you try this.
Yeah. So anyway,
I had
and then also the writing's terrible, right? Like Oblivion has really bad writing, and the voice acting's bad too. So you take bad writing and you hire cheap voice actors, and then you're not going to get anything good out of that. So at this point, it's got bad game. It's got bad combat. It's got bad writing and story. It's full of bugs, and it's got a terrible inventory management thing. That's already a lot of gameplay time. That it's and I don't know. I think people were impressed with some of the set pieces and graphics or something like that.
The argument that I've heard the most as to why people like those games is the scope and scale of it, which I don't think is actually that impressive.
Yeah. I mean, I gave up before I could even get to that because everything about it was so terrible in the first few hours I spent with the game. I haven't actually played that much of it because that's how much it pissed me off.
Yeah. It's kind of become a joke now, but see that mountain? You can walk to it. And that's kind of the ethos that's been in these Bethesda Game Studios RPGs. And we should clarify, but when we talk about all the Bethesda games, we mean Bethesda Game Studios. For example, Sean, you've played Dishonored and you like that quite a bit, and that is a Bethesda published game. So not everything at that studio is a train wreck, but I don't really.
Now, Dishonored, is that still an open world game though? I thought it was a lot more linear.
Well, I mean, it's linear in the sense that you're going from mission to mission, but within the confines of each mission, it is what I would consider open world because you can do absolutely anything you want in completing it, including you can dick around in an area as long as possible.
It's a stealth action game, so there's lots of options.
Yeah, okay. A stealth action game is not an open world game.
Well, I forget,
Unless it's both,
you know,
like
you
Assassin's Creed.
say, oh, you're on this mission, and you are in that area, and you got to complete the mission, or is it like, okay, you got this mission, it's not this area, all the way over here, you can go do that mission, or you can go do side stuff?
Well, at least in the first Dishonored, there was like your central hub world, which is the ship that you keep coming back to.
Basically,
Okay.
I think basically, is it Assassin's Creed?
No.
Then
No.
it's not really an open world game.
Oh.
You know what? Here's a game that's quite the analog and a good segue to that is Cyberpunk 2077. Oh my god.
Oh, shit.
The most anticipated game that I can think of, honestly. And
Cyberpunk
boy.
2077 has had so much. It had so much hype for so long.
It had so much potential, like a wrecking ball being held 500 feet above your head, ready to drop.
Like, I can't... There's only one other game that I can really think of that did that much damage to a company or franchise, and that's Mass Effect Andromeda is the only other one I can think of where that was released and a beloved thing suddenly became toxic as all hell, because like the Witcher games are very popular, and they're generally considered to be extremely well crafted games.
Yep.
So, and CD Projekt Red also has a big stake in Good Old Games.
Yeah.
So that's a studio that has a ton of good faith with, you know, the gaming community. But they released Cyberpunk 2077, and now it's like the memes didn't stop coming about that studio and that game. Like, I saw so many like Twitter posts that were that fucking like Cyberpunk template with the yellow background with the text of just them trying to like apologize for shit, and just in so many meme formats. Yeah, like that game caused like
great consternation.
Yeah, that game was so rough that it caused companies to like start actually like trying to implement refund policies.
Yep.
And stuff. Oh yeah, but like,
I mean, I think I saw a comic, and it was a comic made about the Battlefield 5 trailer, which dropped not that long ago, and a lot of people really liked the trailer, and basically, the game. Wait, did I say 5?
You said 5.
I'm a absolute fool. Never mind. I meant to say Battlefield 2042. No, 2042 was the old one.
No, 2042 is the one that hasn't come out yet.
2142 was the old one. 2042. Sorry, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Anyway.
No, 2142 is the future one.
Okay, so anyway, Battlefield, yeah, I saw this comic about Battlefield 2042. And, the character's like, oh, this game looks so amazing. I have to pre-order. And then, in a thought bubble, oh wait, Cyberpunk 2077. I have to buy it on release day. The game's so bad that people don't want to pre-order things anymore.
Yeah, I heard of a couple people that took time off work, and then the game got delayed, and then they still took more time off work because they're like, I need to have the entire day to just sink into this game. And man, they did themselves no favors by naming the game Cyberpunk. When you name a game after a genre set thing, you're fucking calling your shot pretty high there.
Yeah.
And man, so Sean, I know you were super hyped for the game. Did you end up buying and playing it, or was just the press around it so bad?
I ended up buying it and playing it.
Okay.
And my experience, yeah. Yeah, I was not impressed.
Mm-hmm.
I was not impressed at all.
What specifically, really, pushed your buttons?
Well, let me tell you, in a genre where, you can go to any other game that is years older, and, and those games had been released while Cyberpunk was still being worked on, the biggest one was just world, making you feel like you're actually immersed in a world. There was so many glitches related to that That in Cyberpunk 2077, you constantly feel as though you, the player, perhaps, are being hacked or glitched by the developers in their mad quest to make this world seem as artificial and hollow as possible. There was just so many instances where I'm like, yeah, no, this is besides just being an annoying bug, this actually feels like it's completely breaking my immersion here.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
Yeah. And I think that the ideas behind it were utterly cool, but the execution of it was just lacking polish. Well, to the point where you could say that it was raw. It was a raw game.
It lacked polish. Didn't lack Polish. They're a Polish developer, you see.
Indeed.
Yes.
Cyberpunk's definitely it's certainly been the whipping boy as of late. So.
Yep, the dark mark on
that studio. Yeah. Like their shareholders sued because that game was so bad.
Ha!
Crazy.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
Yeah. So. I think this is a good segue, though, because Cyberpunk 2077 was definitely, it was a failed promise. It was promised that this is going to be this grand, epic, definitive Cyberpunk experience. And it just didn't end up being that. But there's another game that I think was also a failed promise, and it goes back to launch games. Now, in the olden days, you got launch games and pack-in games that were, great. Like, Super Mario World. That came with the SNES and is widely considered the best or one of the best games on that platform. Then, as time has gone on, launch games, the quality has started to be a bit shaky around maybe the PS2 era. Nowadays, the Xbox Series X or whatever, I don't even think that had a launch game.
What?
Halo Infinite got pushed back.
Oh,
wow. They got screwed out of that.
Why are they even releasing a console without a...
Because Sony did. Because A, Sony did, and B, they were manufacturing them. What were they going to do?
Hold on, did the PS5 not have any launch games?
The PS5 came packed in with Astro's Playroom, which is by all accounts, an amazing game. Because of how it takes advantage of the new features of the controller. And it's also a huge PlayStation nostalgia trip. Like, people like that game quite a fair amount. But, a lot of launch games for those platforms were also able to be played on, like, PS4 and Xbox One. Is the problem. So,
I see. No exclusive launch games.
That's basically... Yeah, sorry. I should have been more explicit there. But one launch game that I think is probably the launch game that did the most damage is Red Steel.
Oh, God, Red Steel.
Like... When the Wii was coming out, when you first saw that controller, people rightfully scoffed at it. Like, what is this thing? Like, motion controls, what's that? So the lead up to the Wii was definitely, people had a lot of different feelings on it. And so, there needed to be a game that came out that proved that, this is a concept that can work for traditional video games, not made by Nintendo.
Yeah.
Because, Wii Sports, fantastic. Twilight Princess, other people might not have liked the motion controls in that game. I love them. But Red Steel, putting that in and trying that out, that game just didn't work. It just didn't play. You couldn't do anything you wanted to do. And so,
yeah. Well, I think with the motion controls in particular, one of the biggest challenges, and in hindsight, biggest screw-ups, I think, was that Red Steel is trying to be a sword game, okay? And the concept of, using a controller like the Wii controller to fight with a sword, that is a solid idea, okay? In principle, that can be an incredible idea. And I think the problem is that the controller just didn't have enough tech in it to bring that to life, no matter how hard anyone tried, which is why very late in the life cycle of the Wii, they released the Motion Plus adapter.
Yeah,
And the Motion Plus adapter, I think, added a gyroscope because the actual original Wii controller does not, I believe that was what it was missing, they chose not to put a gyroscope in to save on costs. Now the problem is that by doing that, you don't actually know the orientation that the controller is at, except by having tried to calculate everything on the fly and store results and do a bunch of math continuously. And the problem is that the error, just the error between where the controller thinks it is and where it actually is, it gets too great over time, and you get really, really poor responsiveness. And then, so they added the gyroscope, I believe, maybe something else as well, in the Motion Plus adapter, and now they could make a sword game that actually worked. Like The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword had it required the Motion Plus adapter, and it had a more fine, like in Twilight Princess, the motion controls basically,
it was waggle to swing.
It was waggle to swing. Okay,
like vague sideways and upwards, and the stabbing in that game wasn't great.
Yeah, but Skyward Sword now. Now you can actually, and there were other games that used the Motion Plus adapter to actually finely track the orientation of the controller so that you could actually use it in a fairly good feeling sword game kind of thing where you can do different slashes at different angles and it tracks it and understands what you're actually doing. But they didn't have that in the original controller. And Red Steel was a complete disaster because it simply did not do what was promised.
Yeah. And like you said, it was trying to be a sword game. Remember, it wasn't just trying to be a sword game. It was also trying to be a gun game. And that also that worked even worse.
You know what? Let me pipe in here. I had an experience with Red Steel for sure, and it lines up with exactly with what you guys are saying. Like,
It promised very high, and it just could not deliver
very low.
Because the expectations for that game were out of line, probably. But I mean,
they were out of line because it was the only launch game that, like you said, it was the only launch game from a third party that didn't look like a total piece of crap.
Well, there was also Need for Speed Carbon also came out, but motion control, driving like this, that's a lot easier. That's a lot easier to get right than. Also Mario Kart Wii, I always play with the tilt controls because I think that's the funnest way to play that game, and I still am able to do very well with it. So, yeah, you talk about certain games like killing a franchise. This killed an entire controller almost.
Yep. Oh my god.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? Honestly, I am actually really. This is totally just my own side note here, but I'm really choked that the Wiimote and Nunchuck didn't get pulled forward more, because I thought that especially once they added the Motion Plus, that it was actually fun. You could do interesting things with it, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, although they brought the Wii controllers onto the Wii U to be forwards compatible there were two things that went super, super wrong, okay? The first is that they didn't pack in the Wiimote and Nunchuck with the Wii U. So a lot of game developers didn't want to risk making a game that relied on, customers to have purchased additional hardware that did not come with the console.
Yeah, that's too true.
And I remember this was a huge sticking point for why game developers even Nintendo themselves didn't use the motion controls in Wii U era games really much at all. And then they didn't have and then when they went into the Switch, they didn't bring forwards compatibility of anything forward to the Switch, which to me it just annoys me. Because the Wii U Pro Controller is probably one of my favorite controllers ever.
Yeah, that one I'm pissed about. The Wiimote and Nunchuck stuff, getting away from that. I'm not that bummed about that. Well, okay, I shouldn't be that bummed about that, but the Joy-Cons are such a piece of shit that it does make me bummed, because those things are, A, they're tiny, and B, I don't think they work great.
Yeah, this is the Angry Sun Zone. This is the angry episode. I'm looking at a Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and I hate it. Okay? Like, this shouldn't exist.
It's a bit... Yeah, it shouldn't. Like,
There is no reason for this piece of hardware to exist. The only reason this... I can't... Like, I can't... Like, is this just a money grab? Like, it's exactly the...
They needed a screenshot button.
It's exactly the same as the Wii U Pro controller, except for the screenshot button, except worse. The ergonomics are worse.
The thumbstick position is
the stick position's worse. It's ugly. Like, it's literally worse in pretty much every way, except the screenshot button.
Well, there's one other thing, but honestly, this is more of a knock against the Wii U Pro controller, is that the Wii U Pro controller never sent any data through a USB connection, whereas this one can. So you can have this one plugged into your PC, I believe, and use it without having to hook it up through Bluetooth.
I mean,
so again, but that's like
I can hook
that's not really that much of a.
I can hook my Pro controller to my PC through Bluetooth, so I don't really care about having it wired.
As somebody who at one point did not own a Bluetooth adapter for their PC, that was a sticking point. But,
yeah,
hey,
pretty
$20 later, not a problem.
Pretty minor. Mostly I'm just annoyed that they didn't bring the hardware compatibility forward because the Wii U Pro controller was so good. And then also, again, just in general, like, I feel the Wii U had a lot of missteps, and the fact that like a fine-grained, sword type motion controller basically died just due to like poor business decisions and planning. It's very sad, actually, because I would say that once they, like the late generation Wii games like Skyward Sword, and even some of the games for the Wii U, like the Wii U actually, it had Nintendo Land as a launch title, which was amazing, actually. I love Nintendo Land. It had some of the most innovative asymmetric multiplayer I've ever seen. And super, super fun. I love that game. And it has a few games in it that actually do have sword controls. Like there's a Zelda one in particular that has sword controls that work flawlessly because, again, they require the Motion Plus and it works really, really well. I think you could still have that kind of control option available, and unfortunately, it's dead. It's probably not coming back.
The only place you can find that now is VR.
Yeah. Essentially VR. Essentially it was doing things that VR is now doing before VR was actually popular.
So yeah, that's the travesty that is Red Steel.
Red Steel killed a controller probably for like 2 generations and permanently killed it in the home console market.
Yeah. The sin is on your hands, Ubisoft.
It'll only be the only way, if Ubisoft is listening, the only way to remedy it is to remake Red Steel or make a new Red Steel game in VR. That's it.
Speaking of Ubisoft...
Was it? Yeah. I don't know. Again,
Splinter Cell.
Oh, okay. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about this because I think they might actually go against public opinion.
Prevailing public opinion?
Yeah.
So, the latest game, Splinter Cell Blacklist. This is an abomination.
I forgot about Blacklist.
It's blacklisted. Fuck that game. First off, how could you replace Michael Ironside? Michael Ironside is still alive and well, knock on wood. And let me tell you, there was nothing goddamn wrong with his voice acting. In fact, he was integral to Sam Fisher's character. Getting rid of him is fucking stupid. It's fucking stupid.
It's like that'd be like getting rid of David Hayter for a Metal Gear game.
Oh.
But let me tell you what else went wrong with this Splinter Cell game is, and you know what? I would say that even though I still enjoyed Double Agent was where it started to go wrong. They went in a much grittier direction in the series, with the beginning of the Splinter Cell series really focusing on the stealth action gameplay, and it's like the game designers all of a sudden they became more obsessed with it being an action game, and I think they just they got diluted in their vision of what made the series excellent, starting in Double Agent. And Conviction, for me, at first, like as a Splinter Cell game, it was enjoyable, but as a game in the Splinter Cell franchise, I hated it, actually, for what it did to the series. It's just, it went from being, your stealth action game where, yes, you are the badass, who's completely in touch with their environment, and it's up to you to use the tools and the environment around you in order to complete your mission. Meanwhile, in Conviction, it was essentially, you are a motherfucking superhero, You might as well see Sam Fisher sign up for the Avengers at that point, because, now that Black Widow is 6 feet under, he could have replaced her in that series, like, holy shit. And it just felt a betrayal to everything that the Splinter Cell franchise had built up and invested in before that. And to me, it represented, just an abandonment of one's principles. And so, Splinter Cell Blacklist, definitely on the blacklist. Conviction, already, solidly...
Zero conviction.
In
making that game.
And Double Agent was where it all started being a traitor.
Yeah. So almost appropriate downfall.
Yeah. So
that's rough, man.
Splinter Cell. If you're looking to enjoy the Splinter Cell series, the highlight of it was definitely Chaos Theory, and there's even some ports of Chaos Theory for you to try. Truly, like, especially when you play on the more difficult settings. And actually, that's another thing that I didn't like about Conviction, is that every enemy seemed to have this mystical ability the moment that they suspected that you were in the area, that they would just be taunting you endlessly. And the taunts were so comical compared to the tone of the rest of the game. Essentially, hearing an enemy basically trying to, goad you by taunting your mother, invoking your mother's name to try and get you to come out and beam them to death with your one-shot pistol shot straight to the dome in quick-time event mode. It's just this is ridiculous. The number one reason that I would use quick-time event mode was to get these motherfuckers to shut the fuck up. That is not a good game mechanic.
Oof.
Yeah. So that's Splinter Cell for you in a nutshell.
Okay, so I'm gonna throw a game out here.
Okay.
All right, and now this one, this is probably the highest rated and most highly acclaimed game that I fucking hate. Okay.
I am very, very curious.
We've talked about another game by this designer on the podcast already, which is actually a good game. And basically, I'm talking about Braid.
Oh, okay.
And Braid is by a guy named Jonathan Blow. He's the main game designer. He's not the only one on the team, I don't think.
No.
It was not a solo project. But this game, everybody loved this game. This game got hugely... this game was huge. It got very high reviews, basically everywhere. It sold tons of copies and made a lot of money because it was basically the only indie game worth playing on Xbox Live Arcade or something, I guess.
So, okay, the reason behind that is Xbox Live, they did these things called the Summer of Arcade, where they put out a digital game every week and actually marketed them. And a lot of games have come through there and been extremely successful. Being in the Summer of Arcade was huge for your prestige and huge for your bottom line. Shadow Complex is a game that people love. That came through there. Bastion.
Yep.
By Supergiant, that also came through there. So just by being one of the games in that lineup, like gave it a level of prestige and
and the other thing about Braid is that what I'll say is that I think part of it is that it's product at the time. When Braid was released, indie gaming as a concept was still sort of becoming a more mainstream idea. And there weren't a lot of really well-made indie games on the market yet. And I think a lot of people basically were praising Braid so much, partly because they were trying to get ahead of trends or something. And I mean, legitimately, it was a lot better, I think, than a lot of the other... I think the Xbox Live Arcade in particular was kind of full of shovelware initially.
No.
No?
Okay. On Xbox Live had a ton of shovelware in it, but those lineups of games were, for the most part, very solid.
Okay. But anyway, so I think the environment was such that it was like a powder keg where like it was kind of the first like really big indie game that everyone kind of was talking about, right? And the thing is, now Braid's not, honestly, is it terrible? No. It's a puzzle platformer, and it did some interesting stuff with some time manipulation mechanics, and I mean, that was its main thing, really. Other than that, it was a straight puzzle platformer. But here's my biggest problem. The first problem I have with Braid is that the platforming sucks. The platforming makes me want to vomit. Like, jumping and just walking around are not fun. The game has like, I usually refer to like, you know, platforming controls as like loose or tight or something like that. And it's about how responsive is your character to turning left and right. How responsive is the character to jumping when you hit the jump button? You know, if the game, some platformers have variable height of the jump based on how long you hold the button. Now, if that's the case, you know, how responsive is the variable height mechanism to how long you hold the button, right? And all of that is terrible in Braid. It's all really, really sloppy. Your character does not turn quickly. Your character does not... There is variable height jumping in Braid, and it does not respond well at all. And I'm sorry, but that's just... like, right off the top, that is unforgivable in a platforming game to me. Okay? Like, I don't care if you did, like, some interesting puzzle mechanic. You made a bad platforming game.
But, Alex, you're missing the point. You can just undo it. You can do it over again.
Yeah, well, and that's actually something that pissed me off in that game, is that it has this time rewind mechanic where, oh, you know, you mess it up. Well, I'm only messing it up because the game has bad controls. And that's not fun. Okay, when the controls are bad and I, like, you know, hit an obstacle and then I get to rewind because of bad, like, to fix the, you know, mistake caused by bad controls. That just doesn't feel fun to me. Okay, and other than the platforming, you know, I honestly found a lot of the puzzles like fairly simplistic. Like I don't know if it was the first game to do time rewind mechanics. I don't think it was, because those are fairly, like, I feel like there's a lot of platforming games that have done stuff like that.
Prince of Persia came out before this game.
Prince of Persia came out as a 3D platformer with time mechanics.
Yep.
And I hadn't thought of it being before Braid, but Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, is incredible. And I probably did play it. I think I played that like when it came out, so I would have played it before Braid. Yeah. And so I wasn't particularly blown away by the time mechanic. And so the puzzling was just sort of boring, I thought. It wasn't awful. Like, it was fine. But for the most part, I played Braid and I thought, okay, well, this is a fairly short, fairly mundane puzzle platformer. Why is everyone freaking out about it?
But Alex, you missed the entire point of Braid. Don't you understand that the whole story was actually an allegory for the development of the nuclear bomb?
Yeah, and that's the other thing I hate.
Was this a Metal Gear game?
That's the other thing I hate about that game, is that Jonathan Blow is just, he himself, like in interviews and such, like, the guy is
eccentric.
He's a blowhard, okay?
Oh, wow.
I was trying to be nice.
Now,
but I agree.
He talks big. He makes it sound like he's doing these amazing, incredible things. And, I mean, we talked about The Witness before, which was another game he was involved in. And The Witness is legitimately a very good and interesting game. And the non-verbal communication in that game is an absolute masterpiece. And so, I mean, I'll give him some credit for that. But, you know, he talks as if he's doing these things that are, like, incredibly groundbreaking, never been done before. And frankly, I mean, they have been done before. And with Braid, I felt like the execution was actually fairly poor. And he did not deliver on his, you know, huge promises. Because it got a lot of press even before it was released.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's just, I'd say Braid is a fairly forgettable. It's an average puzzle platformer with below average platforming controls. But if you read reviews about it, you'll have people saying it's one of the greatest games, like the greatest indie games ever. And I'm sorry, it isn't.
Jeez.
And then these days he's got some, like, he's trying to make his own programming language for some reason. I still don't know what that's about.
Oh yeah, he has had some opinions about dev tools that I don't share, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah. But yeah, like Braid, I honestly not really worth playing.
Sean, I know, you know, back when this game came out, I know you played it, and I seem to remember you liking it quite a bit. Do you have any counterpoints?
You know what? I think there's something interesting about. So there's the ridiculous. For me, I think that Braid, it was very cathartic for me, and this is just more of personal opinion, but as someone who demands perfection from my own personal life in many different areas, Braid touched on that in a certain way where this time rewinding mechanic, you know, you didn't have to restart the level if you fucked up. You just turned back time a little bit. And the end result where, you know, it ends up with a perfect run. And there's a few games like that, you know, where, you know, you'll go through the replay of the run and it shows you the results, you know. But, you know, with Braid, just hacking away at the process until you've got this level just right and figuring out each of those puzzles, it did feel very cathartic to me. And taking a look at the storyline, both on the base level of, you know, essentially, you're pretty sure that the main character, Tim, you know, his girlfriend is actually running away from him because he's an abusive prick, you know, and clearly the knight is there to save her, and he's trying to figure out, you know, how does he undo all this. That was interesting on one level, and I could kind of understand that as a thematic element. But then looking at the ridiculous theories that the princess is an allegory for the nuclear bomb and that Tim is piece by piece, you know, like...
That's like Alex, remember back in English, high school English class, I tried to tell you that any poem can be an allegory for the Cold War if you try hard enough. And we were doing a poetry assignment and you had picked a poem by Pablo Neruda, I believe, and it actually was an allegory for the Cold War. Just like absolutely proving the point. It's just like, if you try hard enough, anything can be an allegory for anything.
Yeah, and I think so. You know, with literary criticism, you know, definitely there is a risk of kind of going too far in overanalyzing a piece and reading things in that are not there.
You should watch Unraveled by Polygon for a perfect example of going too fucking far.
Yes.
You know what?
But I think Braid, as a subject of criticism, as game criticism sort of evolves, Braid has been subject to way too much criticism. Way too much. It is, like, seriously, it is not a game that
warrants that much
discussion.
I think that's
You know what I'll say is that if you were ever thinking of trying Braid or have tried it...
it's a short game. I mean,
it's a short game. If you want one whose secrets that you delve are much more satisfying, try Fez. Fez was an amazing experience. It has that similar gimmick to it, that really defines it. And it has that same therapeutic feeling for me that I felt as when I was going through Braid.
And is also designed by somebody who
an eccentric game
who shouldn't be in front of a microphone.
Yeah, he's also an asshole. But I think I think Jonathan Blow, if anything, is really it's more like he wants to be a game critic that happens to be trying his hand at making games.
You know what?
There's much better examples of that.
I dared Jonathan Blow and Phil Fish to get together and create a game studio called Blowfish. And it would just
oh my god! This needs to happen. This needs to happen.
It needs to happen.
Blowfish needs to make a game.
Oh my god!
And it would be beautiful.
Now, I don't know if we have anything else to say about Braid, but one game that actually wasn't on my list that I was reminded of in this discussion was Limbo. That being, a very critically acclaimed puzzle platformer that I thought I just didn't think it was anything special. But I think that because Sean just popped up Inside on his Steam library. Same developers, yes.
I was actually just thinking, if Limbo was the one I was thinking of, or if Inside was the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
You know what? Okay, let me say this. I haven't played Limbo yet, but Inside, as I delved through that story, it was sickly compelling. Once the story in Inside takes, the perspective of this innocent little boy here, who's navigating through a frankly horrifying world. And I had this knot in my stomach the whole time that I was playing it, being like, ew, what am I going to discover next? This is already creepy. Oh god, what is that? Let me get away from that. I'm like, wait, what am I propelling myself towards to? What am I going to eventually find? And without spoiling it for anyone,
you find some shit.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm gonna say is I've played both Limbo and Inside, and I think largely what I'm gonna say kind of applies to both of them. As a traditional, they are neither a traditional game nor do they have a traditional story in either of those senses, really. Okay? In terms of the gameplay, they're both fairly easy and straightforward. They're puzzly, but the puzzles they're not going to take you that long to solve. The puzzles are straightforward. They're not difficult. And then the story, had the story been communicated more directly, this applies more to Inside, because Inside has much more of an implied story than Limbo
That's
did.
my fucking problem with Limbo.
Because Limbo doesn't really have much of a story.
To me, Limbo has nothing.
Yeah.
Limbo has a little kid in a black and white environment that gets killed by spikes, and then people think it's art.
Yeah,
that's what Limbo is to me. It's a fine puzzle platformer. The platforming is fine. The puzzles are fine.
It's simple, simple, but fine.
It's for me. That's a 7 out of 10 game.
Yeah,
it's fine. You can play it. You can enjoy it. But there was a lot of people putting one of the top 5 games released that year, and
so
really going to town for it. And I just didn't understand.
What Limbo has going for it is it's got a unique aesthetic. I think that's about what drove a lot of the acclaim, I think, right? Or at least it's what drove interest to it, because it does have a bit of a... I mean, I don't think it's the only game that has that aesthetic of just the really dark, almost monochromatic palette, but it's not a common choice, and it was very stark looking visually. Mm-hmm. It's got a very visually unique look, and people like that. It generates interest for sure. Inside is similar, but a bit more textured. I mean, you said they're the same studio? Yeah. I feel like Inside's basically what Limbo was trying to be, perhaps. Because I agree with you. Limbo feels unfinished somehow.
Oh, I think it felt finished.
Or
I just
maybe just not good. not fleshed out. Really.
I just don't like. It's fine, but the perception around it is that it's like one super amazing game, and it's like, okay, so it's a pretty
straightforward, simple puzzle platformer with a unique graphical art direction. That's about it.
Yeah.
But I feel like Inside is definitely a more fleshed out version of a
yes, very, very phrasing right there.
It's a more fleshed out version of basically what Limbo was trying to do.
Yeah, I haven't played Inside myself and have seen very little of it. I dismissed it as just being Limbo again, so I didn't try it.
But I would say it's Limbo again, except
fantastic.
It's better done. I wouldn't call it fantastic. I'd say it's Limbo is...
The only thing I know about is the twist at the end.
Limbo is a nice puzzle platformer with a story that is communicated non-verbally through not cutscenes, but like the Half-Life style cutscenes where you're still in game and then stuff just happens around you in the background. And it's very stark looking, and it's got a twist at the end. Yeah, so there you go. And, maybe it's the M. Night Shyamalan of game development.
Oh, dear Lord.
I'm not sure.
I mean, David Cage is probably the M. Night Shyamalan of game development.
I'm just thinking in terms of movies that are really... his early work was very acclaimed until he started doing the same thing over and over.
He got pigeonholed. That became the joke about his movies, and then those became his movies.
Yep.
So the weird self-fulfilling
prophecy.
Yeah,
Limbo, Inside, they're fine, but they're definitely overrated.
Yeah. You know what? I'm going to talk about another series that completely lost its way, and that's the Command & Conquer series.
Also bought, EA bought Westwood, and then the series kind of started going down the tube.
Yeah. I would definitely say that the point... Now, some people might disagree with me out there, but I think that the point where the series went downhill was actually Command & Conquer 3.
I disagree with you, and I think it was Generals. But, again, I think it went down. I think it started to decline immediately after EA bought it.
Okay, I need some clarification for the timeline. Did Red Alert 3 come before or after Command & Conquer 3?
After.
Okay, continue.
Yeah. And with Red Alert 3, it kind of went back to its fun, campy roots, at least in the terms of,
They got Ric Flair to do cutscenes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'm whatever. I don't care how that game plays at this point.
And, there's that classic line from, who was it? Tim Curry? Going to the one place that capitalism can't follow. Space! There's probably so many outtakes sitting on the cutting room floor from that.
Not one take. One take Curry.
One take Curry.
Because there can't have been more.
My God.
If there were more, they would have used the... Well, whatever. That was so fucking campy and funny that...
Yeah,
if there were more serious takes, they wouldn't have used those.
Yeah.
I think that EA, just as a company, does not have the same chops that Westwood and later Petroglyph Studios, the remnants of Westwood Studios, that they had. Because all of the Command & Conquer series until EA truly got their hands on it, for me, those were all quality games. And I think that just because they could throw more money into, the art of Command & Conquer 3 did not make it a better game. And I think that game appears to have been lost before they even really started actually developing the code. I feel like the direction that they wanted to take the franchise started going off the rails. And then Command & Conquer 4... Oh my God! It was supposed to be just an online-only version that they released in China. And then they decided to make it into an actual flaming piece of shit game that just destroyed the end of the franchise, too.
Yeah.
They ruined the experience of Command and Conquer for that. And then let's not forget the mindless EA's trying to make a few more quick bucks mobile game version of Command and Conquer, and I'm like that oh my god.
That actually, like, on initial glance, the mobile game actually looked okay, but I mean, I never played it because I knew, oh, this looks like, Clash Royale, except EA's developing it. There's no way in hell this is going to be a, not horrible pay-to-win, ad-filled piece of garbage. So I never even touched it.
Yeah.
Like that. EA, your brand is so toxic. Some games that you make I won't even touch.
Yeah.
I worked for you for almost a year.
My god. Yeah, so Command and Conquer, the series that imploded thanks to EA. They filled the games with implodium and and unleashed it on us.
The funny thing that I don't really get about EA sometimes is that, because they've done this a lot. They see a franchise that's really successful, that's growing, that's really popular from a smaller studio. They buy the studio, and instead of leaving the studio alone to continue making the games that were the reason that EA bought them, they try to force decisions into the studio's management that the studio doesn't want to do. Half the studio, the studio starts falling apart, and all the people that actually are important to why the games were good start leaving. And then, of course, they still own the rights, and it's just not the same. They've done this. It's a pattern with them, and they don't seem to learn. And I just don't get it, because there's a few studios that they do kind of more. Take DICE, right? They mostly seem to leave DICE alone and let them just develop the Battlefield games on their own, which, not entirely, but
yes
it seems like they give DICE a lot more autonomy. That is, I don't know, maybe not.
Because I will counter that with 2 points. One is that Battlefield is still a bi-yearly franchise, where there's a Battlefield game every 2 years. I'm pretty sure that's been the cadence for a very long time. So that's still you have to have a deliverable every 2 years. And sometimes, with Battlefield 4, they did not make that deliverable in quality and with enough quality. That game was buggy as fuck when it came out. And 2, Battlefield Hardline. Oh. You either forgot or do not know what this game is.
I must have missed this.
You know what?
This was the Battlefield game where one of the factions was cops.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, never mind.
You know what? Let me put it this way. EA's business model, the best allegory for this is pies. A great video game developing company, they make a beautiful pie. What does EA do? They see this pie and they go, you know what? I bet everyone would love this pie. And you know what they do? They buy the pie-making company, and the first thing they do is they fucking jam their fingers into the pies in the pie factory before it makes it to your table. That is the EA business model. They can't help themselves.
And it's so funny, too. Okay. So, the origin of EA is hilarious in hindsight. Because Electronic Arts... The original name of the studio was Electronic Artists. And there's this amazing old, newspaper article where the headline, it was about, EA and this gathering of all these creative minds. And, the byline on it or whatever was, can a computer love? And, they started out as, techno hippies. Huh. And now they're just, corporate FIFA overlords. It's so funny to me.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
absolute power corrupts absolutely.
I mean, that's the funny thing, though. Actually, a lot of the large corporations actually do have surprisingly wholesome roots, right? I mean,
same with Activision. Activision was developers that wanted to get credited in their games from Atari, but they weren't willing to do that, so they split. They made Pitfall and they made Breakout and all these cool games for the Atari. And now they're the Call of Duty studio. That's all they do. All their other stuff that they did, they don't do anymore. They don't do Guitar Hero anymore. They fucking milked that cow until it shriveled up and died.
I even remember, Yeah, they used to do publishing too for other studios. There was this other game I played a long time ago. I can't remember if Activision actually developed it or if they were just the publisher. But it was this really weird, it was a Star Trek RTS.
Okay.
Yeah, Star Trek Armada. And I think it even had a sequel, Star Trek Armada 2. And, I'm going to be honest. Was it the best RTS? No. But I do like Star Trek, especially 20 years ago when it was being actively released. But basically, they somehow or other, got the rights to develop a Star Trek RTS with its own unique original plotline and story. And honestly, they did a good job. It was a interesting game with little fun RTS mechanics, and I played the campaign, played some multiplayer. It was a fun game. I liked it. Activision doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, if we want to get into a studio that does put out potentially questionable games, look no further than Square Enix.
Oh no.
Final Fantasy 15. Let's talk about it.
All right.
Oh my god, I've got so many goddamn notes. All right. So, Final Fantasy 15, my favorite way to describe this game is that it's an open world game designed by people who have only ever heard of open world games. Because this game does everything an open world game could do wrong. And it also does almost nothing that the Final Fantasy games do right. So, let's start by the fact that, one of the key things with open world games is exploring the open world. So, what does this game do? Okay, you have a car. Or can you drive the car? On the roads. Can you drive it off the roads? Not from the start. You need to get something later to be able to do that. Okay, if I get that thing later, is it going to be, is it going to control well off-road? No.
Huh.
The game has... the travel is built around this car, and there is fast travel in it, but if you're using the fast travel, you're doing yourself a disservice. And the reason for that is, all of the side quests in the game are absolutely flavorless. They are, I don't want to call them white rice, because white rice is awesome and has more flavor than these goddamn side quests.
Oh, God.
Alright? It's just one line of dialogue from an NPC, one line of dialogue from your main character, Noctis, who's a dick. I fucking hate this kid. And then, one other line of dialogue saying, go here, I need this thing. And then you're off. There's, very little dialogue with the actual quest givers, for the most part. And any, flavor texts that you get along the way with your party members talking to each other about the quest, if you fast travel, you miss it, pretty much.
Oh.
It only really triggers if you take the quest, go into your car, and drive. And now, I drove pretty much everywhere, despite the fact that getting from point A to point B sometimes could take you 6 or 7 minutes, and the car drives automatically. If you want to drive the car, you literally drive the car by holding down the trigger and it auto drives. And you don't really, it's not like you have a great sense of speed and you're taking sick turns or anything like that. The driving was, the best part of that game, weirdly. And the only reason for that was, the banter between the party members, was actually okay before it got pretty stale and repetitive. The group of 4 that you have kind of do seem like friends that have known each other for a while. One of them, Ignis, you'd love him, Sean. He constantly does, really shitty puns. But the way he delivers them is completely deadpan. So he's not, putting emphasis on the puns. And, in the subtitles, the pun words have quotes around them. It's so weird.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, the only reason the driving was tolerable was because your car had a radio that you could buy soundtracks to other Final Fantasy games to play on them. So it was, that part was actually, kind of chill in a weird way, but, everything else around that game was so fucking garbage that it didn't help. Visually, the game, I think, is really unimpressive. And this is coming from, I think the Final Fantasy games have been, for the most part, some of the most impressive visually games I've seen. 8, 12, and 13 for the respective platforms were games that, blew my mind when I saw them for the first time. in like the in-engine stuff. I'm talking like the CG cutscenes in this game do look amazing, but there's almost none. It seems like, you know, the game had a very troubled development for sure, so it seems like the budget for that game just went to the fact that it took so fucking long for that game to come out that the budget didn't seem to be put into quality. There's a day-night mechanic that's stupid. Like, for a while you can't even really drive at night. And even because devil monsters come out at night. And so you'll be driving and then like an iron giant will like plop down on the road, and then your car just comes to a stop and you can't drive past it. And it's so all the traversal is awful, and because of this day and night mechanic, there's certain things that you can only do at day and night, and there's not a fantastic way of passing time.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this before, but you know, one of the things we often really liked when we talked about why we liked open world games, it was because traversing the world is fun.
Yeah, and in this game, it's not. The number one reason why traversing the world is so bad in this game is this one fucking bush that they copy-pasted all around the environment, everywhere. It's like a little bit taller than your player character, fairly decently wide,
No.
and it has collision. You're bumping into this fucking thing constantly, and it's everywhere. And because it's copy-paste, it's not like they may have used like speed tree for the trees. They didn't use like speed bush or whatever to make a bunch of like unique bushes. Like I cannot. Oh my god, this bush haunts my nightmares.
You know what? Maybe this is not different bushes. Maybe this is one central bush.
That you can describe the size and shape of the bush tells me all I need to know.
Oh my god, this fucking bush. Oh my god. And it gets in your way when you're traversing. It gets in your way during combat as well. And the camera during combat is also terrible. They went with action combat for this game.
No.
Instead of menu-based combat. So, this is their like one of their first big attempts at that, like other than the Kingdom Hearts games, which had the same director, Nomura. And the combat feels like it's got like some interesting stuff where like, okay, it's very like dodge focused, where you really want to be split second dodging this stuff, but it's just feels so stiff and unresponsive a lot of the time, and a lot of you can throw your sword to warp to enemies. And, that's the most interesting thing, but that's extremely finicky. It doesn't feel like the combat has any flow at all. All of the, equipment that you can get and equip, just feels... It doesn't feel like there's meaningful progression behind it. The actual, character leveling up progression also feels really stilted and off. There's a tech board that's got, a bunch of, really weird stuff on it. Split up into these things help your exploration, these things help your battle, these things help your individual things that the character specializes in. For example, one character takes photos everywhere, and so you can level up his photo taking.
How does that help you?
It doesn't.
What the fuck?
Is it do you get to look at them or something?
Okay, so at the end, when you decide to rest for the day, which is what takes all your earned experience and gives it to you. So you have to be resting to actually, get your experience to level up. Then you get some, really weirdly well-rendered food. That has texture pop in, though, so it looks like it looks like garbage, and the textures pop in, and that looks fucking delicious.
Then strange experience.
And then you get, this list of photos that are just, generated from what you've done, you'll get an action pose of you in battle, or you driving along the sunset or whatever, and then a few from random stuff that you do, you can stop at certain spots and take extra photos and stuff like that. So it's it's there to evoke what I think this game was trying to do but failed. I was initially extremely excited for this game because it was pitched as a Final Fantasy road trip movie, because the basic plot of the game is that you and your buddies are driving to this other, kingdom, because your main character is getting married. And so, like, that's kind of a cool concept to build a game around, and even cooler to build a Final Fantasy game around because of all the baggage that carries. So, I thought that this was going to be like, you know, okay, that makes sense for it to be an open world. You're driving to this kingdom, you're going along this path, you're going to various, you know, towns, complete side quests, getting, like, a lot of flavor on the places that you're visiting. But it just has none of that. It immediately devolves into there's an evil empire that attacks your hometown.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah, really. And then, like, it could have been awesome. It could have been, like, you know, this sense of camaraderie between these four people. Some of the stuff they've done to make it seem like a road trip stuff. Like, you know, having to stop for camp, having, you know, to eat a meal, and you see these photos and stuff. And, you know, there's a fishing minigame, of course.
Of course.
Like, a lot of that stuff could have been a really cool thing, but again, this game feels like it was torn in two different directions between what it set out to be and what it ended up being. It's just... I will go on... I think it's the worst Final Fantasy game. And that's a tall order, because 2 and 8 exist, as well as 10-2. And 10-2 also exists, and that's a whole other can of worms.
I mean, Final Fantasy has probably the worst numbering scheme.
It's one of the worst. I think the Winning 11 games have a worse numbering scheme.
10-4.
Sorry, Winning 11?
It's a soccer franchise because there's 11, you know, players on the pitch.
Okay.
But what happens if you put numbers after them?
Oh,
Oh my lord.
But yeah, so yeah, that's...
Just tell me, have they made a Winning 11-11?
I don't know. I think if it eventually turned into Pro Evolution Soccer, I'm not 100% sure on that. Soccer games outside of FIFA scare me.
What about Super Mario Strikers?
That scares me. Have you seen Waluigi Crotch Chop?
Oh my lord.
It scares me because the AI cheats like a motherfucker.
Yes, it does. Oh yeah, and the last thing I want to like really hammer home about Final Fantasy 15 is I mentioned that Noctis, the main character, is a dick. He embodies the thing that I hate that people talk about Final Fantasy as. Like, people talk about Final Fantasy as having, you know, the moody or brooding or whiny protagonist. And that has been true in the past, but generally, like, the characters have had specific reasons about it, or something. Like Titus and Squall from 10 and 8 respectively were shit. But, like, Cloud had a reason behind how he acted in that game. Lightning had a reason behind how they acted in that game. Noctis, as far as I can tell, is just being a prick all the time for no discernible reason. Like, he's just...
He was on the shit list?
Yeah, like, I've gotten decently far in that game. I still have no idea what his motivation is. I don't know. It's fucking garbage.
So I took a look at some of the older games that I had played for N64, including some of the ones that, yeah. So I'm gonna give you a quick laundry list of games here, because I had a few on my list. I tried once upon a time Superman 64.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
As a child, this was a traumatizing experience.
Oh, God.
Lex wins.
Yes.
Lex always wins.
If the Superman franchise only existed on the Nintendo 64, Lex Luthor wouldn't win.
All right.
Like, Superman 64 is one of, like, it's one of the most notable examples of a bad game. Like, that brought itself to a certain level, like having the license.
Superman 64 is, like, for those of you who don't know, it is literally, its claim to fame is basically being one of the worst games ever put to cartridge. Especially, like, you gotta consider, like, earlier I was saying, oh yeah, you know, there's lots of bad games that we're not going to talk about because anyone can throw an executable file on a website, right? Superman 64 is not that. It is a licensed property from DC that had to be printed onto cartridges because this is the N64, and it is an abomination.
You'd have more fun loading a cartridge full of gunpowder into your N64.
You would, actually.
Turning on the power.
That would be very fun.
Yeah.
What I would recommend that you try instead is Super Mario 64. That's another game that starts with Super and ends with 64 that's not going to drive you up the fucking wall.
Unless you're wall jumping.
Oh, yeah. And if you're one of those people that's like, oh, I gotta try it for myself, I'll go and emulate Superman 64 just to see how bad it is. Don't.
No.
It's not worth it.
There's another game on there. Now, there's plenty of Mario Party games that I enjoyed. But let me tell you, if you want to experience some permanent damage to your thumb joints, try playing the first Mario Party for too long. You will quickly discover that the designers of the Mario Party series realized there was something terribly wrong with their first game when the second game already had many improvements that eliminated some of that.
Fucking Mario Party 1, holy shit.
I mean,
that game is mean.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we'll go back and reminisce about the Mario Party games. We're always reminiscing about Mario Party 2 and 3.
Yeah.
It never won.
Yeah, 1 had probably just as many things that take away coins from you as give them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you mentioned, your thumbs just falling off with some of those mini games where you have to rapidly rotate.
Yeah.
Nintendo actually had to put out gloves that they would send you in the mail if you requested them to put on your hand because people were using their palm to spin that. And they were, getting horrible calluses and ripping the skin on their palms from spinning that thing so much. That's how devastating this game was to your hand, that they actually had to put out... this was, the first example of the fucking Wii condom, basically.
Yeah.
There you go.
Nintendo, Jesus Christ. Your peripherals are destroying the world.
And, one of the... Well, you know what? I've got, 2 more that I'll go through real fast here on the old school side of things, and one of them is actually not a Nintendo 64 game, but Jet Force Gemini. I actually have it sitting there on my goddamn shelf.
I thought you liked that game.
You know what? I tried replaying it. And I don't know... You know what? Rare came out with so many other great hits. And Jet Force Gemini, when I come back to it, I'm like, oh my god. It does not feel as well polished about it. I don't know what it was about that game that sucked me in so much the first time, but coming back to it, it wasn't...
I think, sometimes in that era, the transition from 2D games to 3D games, it was rocky.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of stuff that came out that just doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
And even if it felt like it held up at the time, it doesn't. It might have been okay for the time, but it isn't now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for sure.
And it's funny. I was actually looking at a couple games that I was thinking of, and I was like, we should maybe talk about them a different day because there are some games from that era that had really interesting ideas that I don't think have really been done quite the same way.
Yeah.
That would be kind of interesting to see, given that the limitations now that held them back are the technical limitations. A game in particular I'm thinking of, there's this one called Space Station Silicon Valley.
Oh my god.
It's
a Rockstar game.
Interestingly, essentially a Rockstar Studios, before the studio that made it got bought, I think. Or did they just get renamed or something? I'm not sure, but they got renamed and now they're Rockstar North, I think. Anyway, I guess I'm just talking about this game now, but it's I liked it. I liked it a lot. It's a very interesting game because basically you control a microchip. And the microchip you can control can take over animals. I think the concept is that the animals are supposed to be robots or something, but that part, I can't remember the story, what little that game had. But basically, it was just sort of a weird excuse to essentially control a whole bunch of weird animals with different control schemes and then trying to accomplish objectives on this space station, right? I really liked it. I thought it was a really cool concept. And even at the time, though, the controls held it back. Because the 3D, especially the camera angles were, really challenging. And...
the N64 controller, it's...
it wasn't the best with that controller. I think if you wanted to make something like that today, you could do it a lot more justice. Because it was a cool idea. it was a cool concept. And you could do more, especially in terms of different animals that you're able to take over, right? Man, there was another game where like taking over animals was a whole point in it.
I bet. But
not that uncommon, I guess. But
yeah.
Anyway.
Force Gemini. I know so little about this game.
You know what?
I know it's a rare game. That's about it.
I think me and Sean
when
played
they did
once.
Developed by Rare Game.
Banjo-Kazooie was definitely the other end of the spectrum for Rare's like games like that. Like, I don't know. Yeah, I would say that Banjo-Kazooie, but there's also, I don't know, Jet Force Gemini. I think it was just the controls that did it for me. They did not. It did not age well.
I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of games from that era where the controls and camera angles and stuff like that, they're the reason it's not holding up.
The last game on my retro list is not a 3D game, it's a 2D game. It is Echo.
Echo the Dolphin?
Really?
The Dolphin.
Oh man, okay. I've not played Echo personally.
I mean,
but
difficult as fuck.
Yeah.
Frustrating.
Do you know the story behind that?
No.
So okay, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard this enough times that it's either true or a Mandela effect. But the developer of that game was scared that people would rent it and beat it and not buy it. So they made the game more difficult than I think it had any right to be for a casual dolphin swimming game that invented Vaporwave.
Yeah, you know what? I think what's interesting is I read that recently too.
Okay.
So you're not crazy on that one.
I mean, I've heard stories like that where the devs usually I've heard that same story, not about Echo the Dolphin, but about games in general, and many times usually it's at the behest of the publisher. So the stories go.
That was the entire ethos behind arcade machines.
Yeah.
Making them as fucking difficult as possible.
Yeah. But yeah, Echo the Dolphin. I really liked Echo the Dolphin, honestly. I thought it was a fun game.
Fair game.
Was it difficult? Yes. Could it have been simpler? Yes. Well, does that make it a bad game? Maybe.
It's difficult to tell.
It's difficult to tell. I liked it though, and I'll say this: it wasn't. I think maybe the problem with it is that it's a bit esoteric in terms of its hints.
Yes.
Yep.
It doesn't tell you how to play the game.
I've seen 3 pieces of dialogue from that game. Incomprehensible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean the thing is, if you screw around with the controls long enough and exploring the level, eventually you'll probably figure out what to do. It's just that it's whether you enjoy that or not, I think. Because, see, for me, I really enjoyed my time with Echo the Dolphin because I wasn't really trying to beat the game. Partly that's because I didn't even know you could beat the game. I didn't even, I was so young when I played it, I didn't really understand the concept, necessarily, of, even progressing in a game. And so I just, screwed around and played with, swimming the dolphin around and hitting weird crystals with my echolocation, and I'm like, why are these crystals here? I don't know. What am I doing with them? I'm not really sure. But I just kind of explored the world, and it was fun. And it was kind of chill, right? And so, amusingly, it was almost for me, the game was so difficult that I didn't even know it was supposed to be difficult, and I just, swam around.
You know what?
And eventually made progress, accidentally.
There's another game for the Sega Genesis that you could verbatim have the exact same experience that you just described, but you'll actually have fun. You know what that game is? It's Toe Jam and Earl, which I have talked about before. But yeah.
How the fuck is that the same experience?
I don't at all. I wouldn't at all.
You're comparing weird dolphin adventure to funky roguelike.
Yeah, I've played
Toe Jam and Earl is pretty sick.
I've played Toe Jam and Earl. Not at all. Not at all getting what you're trying to put down there.
speaking of the Genesis, I had Sonic on this list, but I removed it.
You had Sonic on this
Oh
list.
god.
I could talk about Sonic at a later date.
Fair enough.
But let's shift gears a bit. Okay.
I mean, we could talk about Shadow the Hedgehog.
We don't need to.
That was a game.
We really don't need to.
We don't.
So, I started this off with a JRPG with a weird name, and I still have one game I want to talk about after this one, but let's bring it back to that it's such a healthy genre to get weird, awkward games out of. Bravely Default. Yes, that's the name of the game.
Okay.
This is a JRPG for the 3DS. And Bravely Default, for the first good chunk of time that I played it, I was having a fantastic time with it. It is a game that wants to harken back to like the older era of JRPGs. Specifically, I'd say Final Fantasy III is what it is most like looking back into. It's got a job system like 3, like 5. 4-character party. You're literally going around to crystals and checking out the crystals and stuff. And the game, because it was on the 3DS, it did a couple like really awesome quality of life things, like being able to save anywhere, for example.
Yeah.
That's a really good thing to implement for a portable RPG. It also had the ability to completely turn off or increase the encounter rate.
Oh.
So, like, if you want to explore an area afterwards, say you like missed a path that you didn't go down, you went down the critical path instead, you can very easily traverse different places, which is a godsend later on, let's just say that. There's a couple things that was initially irking me about the game. The job progression was really stilted, where each job had different levels that you got ability points, and you eventually level those up. And as you level those up, you got more abilities and attacks that you could do. And it had a pretty, expected progression of the amount of skill points that you needed. But at some point, it went from 800 to get to a level to 3,500. So like that jump was like really crazy. It's like, okay, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then you find out that, and this I don't remember if this is explained to you, but it took me by surprise that if you start using a job that you're not leveled up in enough, you'll actually, like, your stats will take a penalty. And
Oh, what?
yeah.
Huh.
So, and for a game with a job system, like having that wealth of customization to what your party's roles are, that feels really off to me, because already going into a low-level job, you won't have access to a lot of abilities of that job. But say you just really need a certain ability of that, or you really need, more speedy characters in your party for a particular encounter. If you, experiment with new stuff, you're going to be penalized for a certain period of time until you level those jobs up. And so that was really disheartening to see. Like, it felt like it really broke that system, and which is weird because that's a system that, has been done extremely well in the past. That's why I say it harkens back to Final Fantasy III in particular, because Final Fantasy III had a similar thing where switching jobs came at a cost, and I think that's just such a backwards way of designing that system. So beyond that, which was irking me, the characters, I didn't like them that much. They were kind of tropey, but whatever, that's par for the fucking course as far as I'm concerned. But then it got to the point where the storytelling just became insulting to the player.
Insulting?
Let me put it this way. I have put a lot of hours into games I have not liked to see them through to the end. I quit Bravely Default out of spite.
Wow.
Like, it did something that pissed me off so much that I put it down and said, I'm never touching this game again. Even if I think, oh, maybe I should go back to that, I'm never playing this game again. Because you have a fairy companion named Aerie. Really original name,
Aerie
right?
the Fairy.
Yeah. And as you go through the game, you're basically finding out about, past events and, sealed up evil and all that stuff, standard JRPG stuff. And as you're going through, you as the player start to question more your fairy companion about like what they're doing. And I'm getting into spoilers here, but whatever. I don't give a shit.
I'm probably
Yeah.
I know you two don't give a shit.
We're not playing.
Saying it for,
if you're listening, why would you want to play bad games?
Fair enough. And so at a certain point, you as the player are straight up told that she is evil.
What?
Yeah. And crazily enough, the characters are also told fairly directly that the fairies are not good. That they are not to be trusted, that they are evil, that they are the cause of, any calamity that's happening in the world. The player characters are told that. But that doesn't get reflected in any of the actions or anything that they do. And, like, one of the most direct... Maybe that's because one of the most direct explanations of this comes as part of an optional thing. But it's still like, why even put that there? It felt like they were, really trying to foreshadow this twist. And then just told you the twist before it happened. So the storytelling, is really bad in that regard. But what the game, and as well, the game has a subtitle, Bravely Default, Where the Fairy Flies, or something like that. And after you get to a certain point in the game, if you hover on the title screen for a little bit of time, the text, some of the text fades away, and just says, Airy lies, in all red text.
What?
Because, that Airy is your companion, and Where the Fairy Flies, if you take away some of those letters, you get that.
Sure, I get that, but what?
Yeah, so they're being really upfront about this twist that isn't a twist. And it's like I don't know if the people that were writing and designing this game felt like they were doing something special with this, your companion that you've had for a while is evil. That's not a new concept by any stretch. So I don't understand. But here's where the game falls apart. Really falls apart. Time loops. Let's talk about them.
Uh-oh.
Oh no.
Uh-oh. You get to a certain point in the game where something happens and you're sent back in time to basically the beginning of the game. But you still have all your stats and all your jobs and all your equipment and all that stuff. And this is where turning the encounter rate off really fucking comes in handy. Because you have to go through certain areas again.
Oh, God.
And everything's still severely under...
No, well,
you're overpowered, or...
I forget. I'm pretty sure they raised the level to where you're at. And as part of that's you go back in time and you basically have to go to every crystal that you went to and fight a more powerful version of the boss that you fought there.
Oh, good.
And there's also optional bosses. You have to beat certain bosses to get certain jobs in the game, and there's an optional boss associated with each job that you have that you can go and refight, and at appropriate level. So that happened, and I did that. I went through all the crystals. I beat all those optional bosses, got to the same point, and almost nothing changes in the dialogue, and you're sent back in time again.
Wow.
And you have to go through again to all those fucking 4 crystals and beat those optional bosses if you want. So I did that again, and again, barely anything changes, and it sends you back again.
Excuse me?
And I'm like, what the hell's going on? This game has the most padding I have seen in anything. That's including insane asylums and movies. This game has more padding than those rooms. And you know what the most... So that's when I quit. That's why I said this game is not respecting my time. Which JRPGs usually don't, but this game is insulting my time. And you know what the crazy thing is? I looked it up. It does it one more time.
Wow.
You have to go through and fight these same fucking bosses 4 fucking times.
Wow.
And it's infuriating to me. And they released a follow-up to that called Bravely Second, and soon they're releasing Bravely Default 2. So this actually probably has the stupidest naming scheme, numbering scheme ever, right?
Bravely Second,
and then Bravely Default 2.
Oh,
what the hell's going on here? But I don't know. So this
Bravely
that right there, Santo, is the default. The default is that you fight the bosses.
Yeah, I understand. like the term default now is used as a shitty way to like talk about like players in Fortnite not having like super crazy cosmetics. So default is now a derogatory term. It should have been a derogatory term way sooner with this fucking game. Oh my god. Alright. Calm. No, angry. Because it's still the Angry Sun Zone.
Alright.
That particular studio did also make Octopath Traveler, though, and that is a good game, so maybe the other games in that series are fine. But
they don't just produce garbage.
But this game, whoever designed this needs to be shot. Whoever designed this needs to go back in time and design it better.
Yeah. Multiple times. 4 times.
So,
yeah.
Speaking of designing and the effort that goes into design, I just want to talk about a bit of the... I'm going to call it dark design.
Okay.
That's, you can design...
It's like the deep web?
You can design a game
oh my God.
to be fun and do a great job.
Okay.
But you could also design a game to make money and do a great job.
Never mind.
And I just want to, talk about shitty mobile games and why I hate them. So we're talking games like, what did you say earlier? I don't even remember. Something Clash of the whatever. I feel like...
not Xenoclash. That's something extremely different.
Sorry, that's something very different.
Clash of Clans, Clash Royale.
Clash of Clans, yeah. Or Candy Crush, or fucking... And any of these stupid mobile games where it's basically just... The developers have done an amazing job of really tuning a difficulty curve so that it's just a bit too difficult. And you need to conveniently click this nice big button to spend money.
It's like extracting a tooth from your mouth, but instead it's money and time.
Yeah. And
out of your wallet and
I mean,
life.
The thing is, like, I don't really play these games because, to me, they're just not fun. But I watch people play them, and I mostly just... honestly, it feels heartbreaking, because I'm like, they don't really seem like they're having fun. But, the tight gameplay loop and, especially like some of them, they use the variable reward mechanisms, especially if it's got fucking loot boxes. And it's just, I don't like it. Okay. I don't like it. I've never liked it. I don't know why people keep throwing money at it. Is it just that people haven't, it seems like it's mostly older people, at least that I know, that end up throwing way too much money at these games. But
yeah,
I
think the distinction is that these are so I think the distinction needs to be made between just casual games and these games with shitty predatory practices on them. Yeah. I think that distinction is: do they have a psychologist on staff? Because a lot of these mobile developers do.
Yeah, and they specifically optimize the game.
That's nice.
as like they'll go in and they'll optimize the reward mechanisms, based on like the underlying like psychological theory and stuff. And it's fucked up, honestly. Like it's not right. And like if is the game fun isn't even a factor like in your development, you're not making a game anymore. You're just making a Skinner box that extracts money from people. And it's not right, but what can you do? If people subject themselves to these things, like, it is what it is. But yeah, pretty much any of those, every time I open up my app store, it's just filled with them these days. There's so many.
Yep.
The funny thing is, like, it's so easy to tell, too. Like, they all seem to fall into very similar... I swear it's like, did you guys all hire the same artist or what?
It's always this, like, cartoonish character looking to the left.
Yeah.
Oh my god. You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, but I don't like it. It's not going to be reviewed on our podcast, but I will complain about it this one time.
No, see, where it gets crazy is when it, like, gets Inception. because one of the gacha games that I played added a Candy Crush minigame.
Oh my god, really?
Wow.
Well, the Candy Crush minigame, though, it doesn't. There's literally nothing you could do to pay to influence it at all. It's just a fun puzzle mode that they added. And that's the thing that I really wanted to make that distinction, is that, like, you know, the casual game market, like, you know, stuff like Bejeweled, stuff like Columns and stuff like that, like, those are fun little time wasters. Like, I've spent a fair amount of time just playing, like, you know, casual games, like Solitaire or Free Solo or Mahjong and stuff like that. And, like, I don't consider that necessary. I've had fun with those, even if it's just very light, time-wasty activity to do while I'm doing something else.
Yeah. And I think, like, I want to be clear, like, I'm not saying, because I think Bejeweled in particular, I don't know if newer ones, how they are, but I know the older Bejeweled games, they were upfront, okay? They were like, you purchase this game, right? It's like 10 to $20, especially, like, when they were back on PC. And, you know, Bejeweled as a game, you buy it once, and then you just have, like, you know, a few hundred puzzles or whatever to go through. And that's fine. And then there's an endless mode and stuff like that too. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't really play those, but whatever, right? But when you take that and you attach it to this, like, psychologically optimized fucking Skinner box that tries to charge you, like, that tries to get you to spend, like, a few bucks every single time you play the game, like, that is... It's fucking skeevy, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, of all the things that we've talked about today, like, yeah, you know, some of our favorite franchises die and stuff like that. Like, this is the real problem.
Yeah.
Is, you know, just people, like, something that legitimately get angry about is, you know, game developers having predatory practices towards this kind of stuff. Because it's so simple for somebody to input their credit card information and just, like, hit yes on these things, and without really keeping track of how much money they're spending. Like, it's not like an arcade. You know how many quarters you're putting into that thing,
and even real, like, you know, quote unquote real or, like, serious games, like, you know, EA with loot boxes. Now they're trying to add these sorts of mechanics into, like, you know, multiplayer, like, shooters, or Rocket League has loot boxes. I've played a lot of that game. Fucking loot boxes are just as bad, except they're even more acceptable in more full games, right? A game you've paid full price for, and now they're adding
Thanks, Overwatch. Thanks, Overwatch.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I don't like it, but I mean, all I can do ultimately is to just not buy those games and not purchase those items. So,
yep.
And you know what? The only other thing I'll say about it that pisses me off is that, so we used to have a bar near us, and
yes, EXP.
Yeah,
bar.
EXP bar. It was modeled after other bars in other countries, and they tried to open it up locally. And the concept was very simple. You were going to go out for drinks and food, and while you were waiting, you could have a console at your table and you could play on a projector on the wall. Very simple concept, right? Anyway, the government, like, shut them down because essentially the people didn't understand that video games are not gambling, and they thought that it was like an unlicensed... They thought that they were trying to open, like, an unlicensed casino.
Yeah, because, you know, the term gaming for government officials does not mean video gaming. It means gambling.
Yeah, it means gambling. And, I mean, it does kind of frustrate me that... I mean, it really frustrates me that, like, you're not allowed to just have a straightforward, like, you know, if you want to open an arcade effectively where, you know, you can also be served alcohol, pretty much not allowed. It's ridiculous. And then now, you know, the actual game developers, like, they're really blurring the lines between gambling and actual video games. And it's, I mean, it's annoying. And then also...
lawmakers are starting to get involved. Like, the Battlefront 2, you know, prompted the Belgian government to step in and say, like, hey, guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotten pretty bad in some games. So
So for all you viewers out there, we hope that these games do not have a hook on you in a way that negatively impacts your life. We hope that the games that you're playing are fulfilling and enjoying and joyful, and do not meet the the definitions of the games that drive you nuts or steal your money.
Yeah.
And time.
Speaking of awful ways to sell a game, I'm going to go with my final game on my list here. And this is the game that it's the worst game I've ever played a significant amount of time in. Like, in the same way of, like, it's the worst game that I've played that brought itself up to a certain standard, where I'm sure I've played some garbage bootleg-ass thing that I got in a 100, NES ROMs pack.
I mean,
that's probably worse than this game.
Okay,
this game is at least functional.
Random side note, I am a little sad that I never got one of those weird Pokemon bootlegs.
Aww.
Because that would have been hilarious as a child.
Yeah. But this is a game that comes in a series that is very near and dear to my heart that unfortunately is dead. They're still putting out games for it. They're still putting characters in Smash for it.
Ooh.
But Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem. Okay, Fire Emblem Fates. Let's talk about it. Now, I think that the series died with Awakening, but I still think Awakening is a functional game and a fine game that I didn't like. Fire Emblem Fates is a piece of garbage, and I'm so mad. Okay, let's start with how they sold the game. Now, the game has 2 versions. They pulled a Pokemon with this shit, where there's, except worse, there was Birthright and Conquest. And the basic premise of the game is that you're in the royal family of this one nation, but you were raised in this other nation through fuckery. And at some point, you must choose between, like, which of these nations are you going to, like, swear your loyalty to? Where you were born or where you were raised? Interesting concept, like nature versus nurture kind of shit almost. Like that's a very good thing to build a game around. But with this game, they decide, okay, when you buy the game, you're gonna buy one version of it. If you want the other version of it, you gotta spend another $20.
Oh my god!
And after a certain 6 or 7 chapters, that's when the divergence happens, and then from there, they're completely different storylines. So that on its own is like, okay, this feels like you're maybe overcharging a bit for this. Like, I thought both of those routes should have been in just one package, but hey, whatever. Then they said that they were going to release another route called Revelations. Now, as you can imagine, with the name Revelations, all of the juicy plot stuff is in that route. And they released that after the fact, and you need to have, played through the game to fucking play it. And so, even their initial offering, playing through both of those, I played Fates and Conquest to completion, and most of the way through Revelations. Again, I have a problem playing games I hate, where there's a lot of questions in those first 2 routes that are just not answered, that they answer in Revelations. So they're basically selling you the true ending almost.
No.
So that on its own is just a really shitty way to do something. The game that you sell should be a complete package when you sell it. Like, a lot of games that have story DLC, the story is a side story. It has maybe references, maybe explains a little bit of what happened, but it doesn't it doesn't say everything unanswered about the game and tell you what the motivations of the main villains are in both of the games, because the games on themselves don't tell you.
Right.
You need to play this fucking shit. So that's already bad. But then we get into the actual game, and let's start with the characters. So a lot of the Fire Emblem games have pretty shallow characters on first glance, because you don't really get a lot of conversation between a lot of the characters in your party outside of your main characters. Those come in support conversations. And a lot of the characters in older Fire Emblem games actually are pretty good characters. They have clear motivations to what they're doing. They have fun relationships with other characters. and they're built in a way that the conversations, like, they feel natural, and yeah, it's good stuff. They started with Awakening, they decided to implement the marriage mechanic. This has completely destroyed all the characters in the game, because they decided to make it where each character has 3 levels of conversation you can have with any of the other characters that they can talk to, as well as 1 level where they get married and they have a kid. So that doesn't lock them out of still getting to like A rank support with everybody else instead of S rank, which is when you get the kid. So all the conversations up until that point don't really lead themselves naturally into, I love you, let's get married and have a child. So all those like S rank support conversations feel like they come out of completely nowhere.
Oh no.
And because they made it so that, like, you know, the characters that are marked like, okay, this character can have a child, they can pretty much have a support conversation with everybody of the opposite sex. Even characters that they, in theory, should fucking hate, should not get along with at all, can still get to that marriage point. All the characters are completely one-note trope characters. They have one trope to their personality, and that's it. There is nothing interesting about them. And most characters don't have any kind of backstory or motivation that's propelling them forward. In Awakening, this was bad, but it wasn't the worst. There were a few characters in that game that I liked. In Fate, it's abysmal, because most of the characters that you have in the game are either members of these royal families or retainers to the members of these royal families. So all the retainers' personalities is just, hey, isn't this person that I'm serving awesome? That's pretty much it. So all of the characters are complete garbage, including the protagonist. Birthright has maybe the second worst protagonist I've ever seen in a game, because they are useless. Like, the useless idealist is my second least favorite character trope. To where it's just like, oh, friendship, everybody. And they're the leader for no real discernible reason. They don't do anything strategically in the game that makes it so that their path through, you know, beating this other army and eventually toppling a kingdom, nothing makes sense.
Right.
And this is especially bad because there's moments where, like, you know, characters, like, die for, you know, the main character so that they can keep going. And it's like, well, the main character hasn't done anything, really, to, like, they didn't do anything to stop this, and they haven't done anything that makes them worthy, in my opinion, of being the leader. So these, like, dramatic moments just are like, well, this really just didn't have to happen. This is just, like, killing off a character for drama's sake. This doesn't, like, completely stakeless. And so the character is terrible. And that alone, like, if the gameplay was good, I'd let that slide. But the gameplay is not good. So here's a weird one. Weapon durability. Would you guys say that this is a positive for a game to have, or a negative?
I think it depends on the game, but in Fire Emblem, I liked it. Mostly because in Fire Emblem, you have the different weapon... Like, the different weapon strengths, like, I felt like it added something, because I was making decisions like, oh, do I use this, like, legendary lance or whatever? But I can only use it a few times, right? Yeah. So I'd try to save it for, like, a strong boss or something.
I'm not into it, but yeah.
Yeah, like, most people are on Sean's side. A lot of people don't like weapon durability. For example, Breath of the Wild, that was the main complaint about that game, is that it had weapon durability. This is a mechanic that people generally dislike about a game. But I am 100% with you, Alex. In Fire Emblem.
I think I dislike it as usually applied.
Yes.
Okay? I think Fire Emblem is one of the few games that does weapon durability in a way where it adds something to the game. And that is mostly because Fire Emblem actually has, like, unique weapons that are still given durability.
Yeah.
Or hard to get weapons as well, right?
Yeah, like the higher tiers of stuff. Like, you know, an Iron Lance has 45 attacks, but a Silver Lance or a Killer Lance only has 20. And those are way better than the Iron Lance.
Yeah, and so you actually, like, I find in Fire Emblem, I actually make decisions about, like, I'll give my like if I have a Myrmidon, I'll 100%, I'll give my Myrmidon a regular sword too, because sometimes I don't want to waste a killing edge on some low level enemy.
Yeah.
In Fire Emblem, weapon durability adds some depth to the game. It is a good addition. Fire Emblem Fates gets rid of weapon durability for the most part. The only thing that has durability now are healing staves. Because they probably couldn't balance that and have some of the more crazy staffs that do status effects. What this ends up happening, though, is, like I said earlier, an Iron Lance has 45 attacks, Silver Lance has 20. That is a balancing feature in the other games. So to balance that out in Fates, they made it so that the more powerful weapons have drawbacks because you can use them infinite times. Like, if you use a silver weapon, your attack stat and your accuracy will continuously get penalized for a turn or whatever. And so it made it so that these more powerful weapons didn't feel more powerful. I was using regular-ass weapons most of the time through that game. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel like I had a good progression of my characters getting more powerful and my equipment matching that. It was, I don't want to use this weapon because it's going to have drawbacks. And even if it's right to use those weapons, still, like, psychologically, that is, I think, bad design, where you don't want your most powerful stuff to be detrimental to you in that way. That was not good. The stats. So the stats have been inflated to the extreme. And in Fire Emblem, this is extremely important because the formulas in Fire Emblem work off of a subtraction basis. They're not multiplicative, which a lot of things use. So, your attack stat plus your weapon's attack stat minus your opponent's defense stat is how much damage you're doing. And, like, that's fucking the end of it, basically. So, when you inflate the stats that much and drive them to the extremes, that means that characters that have extremely high, like, attack stats and characters that have extremely low defensive stats, that gap widens in such a way that a lot of your squishier characters can get one shot. And in older games, this, like, rarely happened. Only a few enemies could, kill your squishier units. You generally were able to play in a way that you could risk your more fragile units a lot more. It opened up a lot of different play opportunities. So in Fates, your characters are generally squishier, and the formulas also changed in a way that they made it so that your evasion and your skill mattered less to the formula. Your weapons accuracy matters more now. So that penalized speedier characters, to where if you take the exact same stats between two of the games and plug them in older Fire Emblem games, you might get a 5% chance to hit a speedy Myrmidon with an axe. But in Fates, you'd have like a 35% chance to hit. Oh, and in Fates, this one will one-shot them instead of two-shotting them. So a lot of characters became nigh useless in Fates, where they were viable units along with the rest of your army, because pretty much your entire army was viable in these older games. As well, because of the stat extremeness, the way the maps were designed usually as either single choke point that you just held for a while, or you just like inched your way forward and aggro people a little bit at a time. So with the choke point stuff, you basically just like sat your highest defense unit in front and just waited. It wasn't engaging at all. And with these maps, one of the things that I brought up when I was talking about Fire Emblem 7 that I love so much was micro objectives. This game does not have that, where you're under no time pressure in any of these maps. So when I talked about, just inching forward, slowly aggroing units out your way and defeating them, like, that was the optimal way to play that game. You never really took risks, so you never had engaging tactical decisions to make.
Yeah, well, and I think I seem to remember that there's maybe some of the Fire Emblem games where if you took too long, the enemy would even start sending some of the units down after you, that even if you hadn't aggroed them.
Yeah, in some games that happens, in this one it doesn't.
Yeah, which again, that adds, because and realistically, there's a lot of strategy games where like it does feel a bit silly. Like there's this huge enemy army and they're just allowing themselves to be taken out one unit at a time. It's ridiculous, right? So adding a little bit of that pressure to kill them more quickly, lest the rest of the army come to their aid, it makes sense, right?
Maybe they want to be taken out one at a time. Maybe they want to be wined and dined so that you can have an S-rank relationship with them.
And this is a waifu simulator.
Yes, that's what this game ended up being. There's weird petting shit in the Japanese version. It's all over the place.
People petting?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the parent-child thing where, characters have children and they're placed in this weird other realm where time works differently so that you can still have them in your army fighting with you. There's no time skip. This feature originally was taken from Fire Emblem 4, which had parent-child stuff, but in that game there was a time skip. So that made way more sense.
So you were fighting only with the, the next generation
and
many years later.
Yeah, and older versions of your regular characters and stuff. That, it made a lot more sense. And in this game, they ran into a problem that normally I have sympathy for, but I hate this game so much that I'm going to take them to task for it, because each child has one defined parent that they will come from, and then the partner can be anybody. So the support conversations between the child and the rotational partner basically are pretty much copy-paste. They're the same no matter who it is. So again, that makes it so that these characters are poorly written because none of their personality shines through in these conversations. They're copy-pasted. Yeah. And yes, you would have to write a ton more dialogue to have these conversations be more unique between these parents and child characters. But they didn't do that.
Yeah, at some point, you have to ask yourself, is it worth putting all this content in if we're just copy and pasting it?
No.
No, it's not. No.
Yeah.
And
I'm pretty much always going to go with no.
Yeah. In the older games, there were some paired endings, but there were only a few. So they felt more natural between the characters that could have them. And they made it so that, you could have a support conversation between two characters of different sex, and it, not just be some, back and forth lead up into marry me.
Right.
There's so much variation in these other games. And let's see. Oh, the maps. Okay, the maps are all gimmicks pretty much, based around the royal family members. Because there's these spots on the maps that alter the terrain in gimmicky-ass ways, but only the royal family members can use them. So it makes it so that you basically are forced to use a lot of these characters that maybe you don't want to use. Maybe you don't want to use some characters because they have shit personalities or you don't like their unit class. But because of this, you're going to have a super tedious time getting through some of these levels because you need to use these royal family members. As well, that makes it so that some characters that share a class type with these royals are literally second-class citizens. Because they cannot be used for these tactical options. And they also have worse stats in a lot of cases. And less access to a couple of unique weapons. So there's a big character imbalance there as well, where in other Fire Emblem games, most of the characters are viable.
Right.
And are viable, comparatively with everything else. Nothing is you need to use this unit. I will point one positive about this game out, though, is that they do have one map. Unfortunately, it's in Revelations, of course it is. That does have a really awesome gimmick. To where you have this upper... It weirdly harkens back to old Fire Emblem. Because there's a time limit on the map. And there's a bunch of optional shit you can do. Where there's this top section where your army is. And if you activate this panel, you will get a copy of all of those units on this lower section. And on this lower section are a bunch of enemies that have droppable items. Now, your character's stats, the copies are the exact same between them. And they're linked, so that when one loses HP, the other one loses HP.
Oh.
So this is actually a really awesome gimmick for the maps.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. And so that level is actually really, really awesome. To where, you can complete the top section fairly normally if you just, push forward, get to the end, and go on your merry way. But if you choose to do this other path as well, you need to push forward on the top to get to the end before you lose. And you need to be pushing forward enough on the bottom to actually get to these characters that have these weapons that they can drop and stat boosters that they can drop. All while having to manage the fact that, okay, this meat shield that I've been using, yeah, they can take 4 attacks up here. Can they take 4 attacks up here and 4 attacks down there too? So that was a really awesome map that is unfortunately mired in a shit-ass game.
Huh.
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool idea for a Fire Emblem mission.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
Yeah, and let's see. The last thing I'll talk about for this bad game is the pair-up mechanic. Now, the pair-up mechanic existed in Awakening, and pairing up 2 units gave them really big stat boosts. And remember what I said about how this game was subtractive. That means that if you have a big defense boost, that might turn an attack that deals 8 damage to you into an attack that only deals 2 damage to you and stuff like that. So a lot of the time you could just end up with these big balls of stats that could trample through the fight, but that this also makes that you had limited units to work with. But if there's no time limits or objectives and no reason to split up your party, then there's no downside to this. So that's the main thing that I actually didn't like about Awakening. But they messed up even further in Fates, where they made this pretty much mandatory. Because if you had characters next to each other, they would trigger up a follow-up attack that would deal an extra half damage if it hit. And the only way to prevent this is to pair up your units. So there's a lot of cases where you're forced to pair up these units. And one of the things I loved about Fire Emblem that I talked about in a previous podcast is that it's a strategy game that you have a lot of units under your control. That gives you a lot of tactical options. When you're forced to have basically half your army size to go through these maps sometimes, it limits your options and just makes it less fun, less engaging, less varied, less everything. This game is less than the sum of its parts. And the sum of its parts is pretty damn low to begin with. I fucking hate this game. And I'm so pissed.
You hate it with a passion. You're able to talk about it passionately.
Again, when there are a few games that I legitimately, angrily hate. There's a lot of games I dislike, and that's fine. They're not great games. Whatever. This is a game that I fucking hate.
And that's why we talk about it on the Angry Sun Zone.
Yes.
Yeah.
My voice is getting hoarse now for how much I hate this game. It's damaging me even still.
Oh, man. All right. Well, I've got one more I want to talk about, and it's not really one game exactly. In fact, it might be a whole genre.
All right.
And that's Dota, League of Legends.
Oh, come on.
Mostly, I mean, I'm going to be honest. Are the games that bad? Actually, I shouldn't really talk about MOBAs in general because I haven't really played that many other ones. But Dota and League of Legends, I mean, the games themselves, they're all right, I guess. I mean, I have had some fun with Dota when we used to play it ourselves between some friends. And that's about the only way I can actually recommend ever playing these games, to be honest, because they are toxic and they are filled with toxic people online. And really detracts a lot from the experience. There's not many games that I would dislike because of the actions of the community, but if there is any, it's games like Dota and League of Legends.
Okay. Unfortunately, I will agree with you there.
Yeah. And and given how long it takes to play a round, you're looking at an hour, maybe more, but I think probably around an hour most of the time.
Usually it's like a half hour. With games that can stretch a long time.
But
an unknown amount of time.
Yes,
stretching over an hour.
But yeah. But I mean, also in general, I don't know. I think the thing is, it came out of a Warcraft 3 custom map mod, whatever you want to call it, kind of thing, right? And in that context, I like it a lot more, right? Because it's like a side thing, and it's not something that is because it feels, I don't know. I think I just don't like the genre in general. That might be part of my problem.
Man.
You know what?
Dota is the most in-depth team-based game that's ever existed.
Is it?
Yes. There are over 100 playable characters. There are over 100 different items you can buy from the in-game shop. The amount of combinations of things you can do, plays you can make, team compositions that you can have, ways to maneuver around this reasonably complicated map. Yes, I do think it's the deepest team-based game that has ever been. That's why when the games go long and you lose, it's fucking devastating. Because there's so much investment required to understand everything that's going on in that game and to perform it even like sub-competently. That's the reason why the community is so toxic. Is like there's so much investment in it, and if you are perceived as ruining their experience, they're gonna fucking lynch you.
Yeah, and you know what? Maybe that's part of why I never liked them. Is because honestly, I've never actually spent that much time playing it because
they're impenetrable. I fully understand that.
Yeah, you know what? And I think that's
maybe I need to play the Pokemon.
There you go, Pokemon Unite. Let's go. You can't shit talk your teammates in that game. It's fine.
There's a valid point in that some games themselves have traits that lend to a toxic community, or at least a community that is adverse to newer players.
Yeah.
I mean, any online competitive community tends towards like being insular over time, just because like the investment required from new players gets higher the longer the game's around. But yeah, it seemed really bad with those MOBAs. Yeah. And the other thing we were talking earlier, RTS games. What happened? Obviously, EA killed Command and Conquer. There is a Homeworld 3 coming out soon. Although I'm gonna fully admit, though I love Homeworld, it's never been like super popular.
Yeah. Age of Empires took like a 15-year break or whatever that ended up being.
Yeah.
By the way, I've heard that the latest expansion for Age of Empires 2 is really fun. Yeah, they've kept developing new ones.
Yeah.
And the latest one has an entire 2 separate campaigns made only with the old school level editor that have had like stellar reviews from people who have tried it. They're like, these campaigns do something that have never been seen before.
Like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Age of Empires 2 is the biggest it's ever been.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
In terms of the competitive scene, and like in the ramp up for like when Age of Empires 4 started development, they did definitive editions of the first game and the second game.
Yeah. They remastered it, right?
Well, they did an HD remaster, and then they also put out the definitive edition, which had more stuff, and they've continued to support it since.
Okay,
with paid expansions.
Because I know I saw that. I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't realize they were adding new content as well.
They added the Bohemians and the Poles.
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't sound offensive at all.
What, Polish people? The Poles?
I don't know.
Anyway. You know what? Yeah. It's interesting how some of the... And you know what? Age of Empires does not come across to me as a game with a super toxic community.
By all accounts, the Age of Empires 2 community has been fairly welcoming.
Yeah. Which is cool to see. I think there's...
But like, at some point the game lasted long enough that it's just like...
but yeah.
Weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, what happened to the heyday of RTS games? You know, more of them than you could shake a stick at. Where like Star Trek is even like getting its own RTS series. You know, for some reason, like what happened to that? Maybe MOBAs happened.
Yep.
And if MOBAs are the reason that RTS games died, I have no recourse but to hate them.
That's fair. Like, yeah. As somebody who enjoys MOBAs, I fully understand the criticism that they get.
The sun is out and the talk about MOBAs is blistering.
How about you, Sean? You got any more?
Let me conjure the list once more. You know what?
I don't know what, because you're not talking.
Okay. This last one, I was debating whether to even put this on the list because you know what? This particular genre, I have a love-hate relationship with, and you're gonna laugh because a whole bunch of the games that I list that I love are also in this list. And that is fucking roguelikes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean...
Saw this coming.
Yeah. It's kind of their whole shtick, really, is to...
I remember one of the earliest roguelikes that I've played is definitely Toe Jam and Earl.
Yeah.
I would consider that a roguelike very strongly. I didn't know what I was doing for the longest time when I played that game. And I only came back to it pretty recently, looking at it finally through the mature eyes of an adult human being who now sees it as a roguelike. I've played games like Powder. Powder's very interesting. You can play it on the Game Boy. The Game Boy DS. They actually have a port for it, which is interesting.
Game Boy DS.
Sorry,
Nintendo
Game Boy DS?
You know what? That's cursed. I've officially... Yeah, no.
That sounds cursed.
That's cursed.
Like, did someone just take two Game Boys, fucking cut them in half, strap them together, solder some wires up, and somehow it worked?
Yes,
my favorite portable console, the Vita Station.
The Vita Station, yes. So my issue with with roguelikes is, you know what? The mechanisms within a roguelike is like the slightly cleaner version of those gacha games. Is if you find it difficult to put down a game before you've been able to beat it, or at least get the upper hand on it, or if you have an addictive personality, you should be warned that a good roguelike, the better the roguelike is, the more it will fucking steal your time. Mm-hmm. And part of this is because roguelikes inherently, are very luck-based. And this luck is something that you have to actively counter with skill. And there will be no-win scenarios. You actually have to come to terms with no-win scenarios. And the thing about roguelike is you also have to be able to know when to put them down. Because there are an infinite number of different attempts for you to take. And an infinite number of painful lessons that you can learn. And what's interesting that I would find is that as much as I enjoy, a game like, say, Noita, for example, which I still play pretty much almost every day that I can. Well, let's be honest, I almost play it every day. What usually brings me to my own doom is not some uber powerful enemy, or a boss. It's
complacency.
It's hubris.
It is fucking hubris.
Actually, yeah, it's totally hubris.
And it is my own hubris. And it is my own petard on which I hoist myself and make stupid decisions that bring myself down. And what's interesting is you'll see that same hubris smack into people at the same time that they make other terrible decisions that lead to their untimely doom. Car accidents,
Well, this took a turn.
Okay, so don't play roguelikes if you're
driving.
Trying to drive?
No, that is the peak hubris right there. No, but in a more serious note, to get back on topic of...
Have you ever thought, what if life's just a roguelike?
Hey,
The most challenging roguelike of all has you pitted against the very forces of nature. Nature itself rises against you to create deadly viruses, wildfires, rising temperatures, heat domes, and it is hell-bent on killing the population, and you have to navigate this all the while the people around you are just going absolutely bonkers, and they're affected by some Cthulhu-like entity which is causing them to lose their shit over the most basic of stuff and devolve into warring factions.
Yeah, if this is how Mother Nature's acting, I want emancipation.
And let me tell you the name of this game. This game, you can find it on the Outside subreddit.
It's the game of life.
The game of life. Be warned. This game is highly addictive, and once you start playing it, you can't put it down. And if you decide to put it down, you'll never pick it up again.
What happens when that car turns over and all the pegs fall out?
Ooh.
What happens when you having so many children that you don't have enough pegs in the car for them?
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Overpopulation. The game of life is deep.
Yeah. You know what?
I think that's just a criticism on affordability. Got to buy a second car, but there's no cars because can't afford it.
That's one thing I'll say is it's interesting that as life goes on, one of the nuances that I've noticed
life goes on, but your video game doesn't.
Even the most complex, video games, they have these systems and mechanics within them that once you get to understand them, you gain mastery over them, you evolve as a player. And this is the parallel with real life. So the meta here is, when you're facing all these real world scenarios, and they seem almost impossible, they seem highly frustrating, think about the systems behind them. Think about what you can see and understand, and what you can glean about the rules and the mechanics of them. And think about who you are as a player of this real life game. Are you a person who will go ahead and abuse the crap out of these mechanics for your own benefit? Do you try and play the game fairly? Do you just try to survive and not get carried away? These are very interesting questions.
Angry Sun Zone. More like Angry Wisdom Zone.
Yeah, stay tuned for our upcoming philosophy podcast.
The philosophy podcast.
Yeah.
So let me leave you that thought. Whether you're playing a roguelike, or a MOBA, or an RTS, or a shooter, remember that life is just a game. And keep playing.
Sure, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for the graduation speech, Sean. If you'd like to get into contact with us, you can do so on angrysunzone@outlook.com. Please, if you think that we're completely off base with these games we've talked about, send in your thoughts, or if there's other games that you hate that you maybe want to hear our takes on, send us a line and you could be included in the podcast.
Yeah, and if you're itching for something to look at while you listen to our voices, check out our YouTube channel. We have a few videos on there. And
more to come.
Yeah, we'll be putting more up.
Eventually.
If you have videos you'd like to see, let us know.
Yeah.
You can also DM us on Twitter. Those are open if you prefer to do that. Now that we're all out of rage, it's time for us to be put in a cage.
Because all the world's a stage. Aha!